Miles Carter stood in the school hallway, clutching the robot he built from scrap metal, the same one that could change his life. But instead of praise, the principal's voice cut through the air. "We have reason to believe you stole this." Students' phones were already up, recording, the laughter sharp enough to cut skin. And then from behind the crowd, a stranger in a suit whispered, "You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into." Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The new semester at Westbrook High started with whispers. The kind that move along lockers like a draft under a door. Not about homecoming or the football roster, but about the weird black kid who supposedly built a robot in his garage. Names traveled faster than truth. Miles Carter heard none of it at first. He was tracing a solder burn along his thumb while the morning bus jolted past the car wash and the shuttered movie theater where summer had ended without ceremony. At home, the morning had begun with the soft click of a coffee maker and the hush of careful budgets. Denise Carter kept a notepad on the counter, where numbers bled into each other. Rent due on the 10th. Utilities skewing high, a red asterisk beside breaks. She slid Miles a plate with 2 eggs and the heel of yesterday's bread. "Don't let them tell you who you are," she said, her voice practical, not poetic. She wasn't the speech-giving type. "Bills don't respond to speeches. Text me if you need me to call the office." "I'll be fine," he said, though fine was a moving target. He tucked the last bite of bread into his mouth, wiped his fingers, and stared once more at the photo on the fridge. Him at 12, holding a Lego contraption like a trophy. Denise grinning like victory had a shape. Under the magnet, a folded printout showed a parts list with prices scratched and replaced by cheaper substitutions. The summer's ledger of creativity. Scavenged servos from a thrift store toy, stepper motors, sourced from a dead printer, a microcontroller purchased only after 2 weeks of tips from fixing neighbors' laptops. The bus was late, as always, and had the tired smell of old vinyl and drying raincoats. He kept a backpack on his lap inside, a notebook thick as a brick with build logs and annotations, and tiny sketches of joints, balance control algorithms in neat handwriting. A boy across the aisle, wearing a Letterman jacket that squeaked when he moved, peeked at the notebook's edge and snorted. "What is that, NASA?" "Notes," Miles said, closing the cover gently, as if to spare the page the weight of an argument. "Man's got his diary," the boy said, loud enough to convert private derision into a public performance. A few snickers followed, then the bus hissed to a stop, and a river of bodies surged toward the big brown building that claimed to make futures. Westbrook High had banners for everything. "Go Falcons," "College Night," "Respect Week." Near the entrance, a fresh poster showed a smiling counselor pointing toward a sign-up sheet. Student Success Pathways, Arts, Athletics, Trades. The STEM pathway board was missing, its metal hooks empty. The small space where it should have hung bore a dusty rectangular shadow. Inside, the halls were a collage of brightness and blind spots. Teachers called out hellos to certain last names like they were passwords. Hall monitors corrected some kids' hats and ignored others. The smell of floor polish hadn't yet yielded to cafeteria grease. Miles found his locker, a narrow metal rectangle that stuck on first pull, and slid in a pair of textbooks he'd bought from upperclassmen because the library's copies were delayed. Next door, a tall senior with sunburned cheeks slapped hands with friends and said, "Yo, Howard's gonna eat alive anyone who can't wire a breadboard blindfolded." "Howard?" someone asked. "Advanced robotics," the tall boy said, rolling the word advanced like a marble. "If you're not already in the club, don't even bother." Miles closed his locker and stared at his schedule. There it was, Advanced Robotics, Room 3B, 3rd period. He'd harassed the office twice in August to get in, armed with emails, photos of his prototypes, and the quiet insistence that he was ready. He had been told the class was full and very competitive, until a guidance counselor finally called to say a seat had opened. The counselor's voice had sounded surprised, like an elevator stopping on a floor nobody had selected. On his way to homeroom, Miles passed the trophy case, a glass cathedral to victories. The football team's silver bowl was polished to a mirror. A cardboard cutout of the quarterback, all jawline and promise, stood beside it. A smaller shelf held academic awards from the Science Olympiad in Mathletes. 2 years old, dusty, a teacher walked by and clapped the quarterback on the back, saying, "This is your year, Colin." Miles watched their reflection in the glass, a tableau of investment. He wondered whether anyone saw him as a seasoned Homeroom was an easy inhale, a seat by the window, and a teacher who kept the attendance as if names mattered. A whisper behind him materialized into a comment. "He's the robot kid." He turned slightly and met the eyes of a girl he didn't know. Brown hair, hazel eyes, a cautious curiosity. She didn't smirk. She simply held his gaze long enough for him to understand there was a difference between a whisper that wounds and a whisper that wonders. By second period, he moved through the building like a patient in a hospital, following lines and arrows. The subtle racial choreography of Westbrook was most obvious near the gym, where a coach in a polo shirt intercepted a cluster of black boys to mention basketball tryouts, then let a white kid breeze past with earbuds blasting. "You boys built for the court," the coach said, voice casual, as if he were making a weather report. The boys chuckled, half flattered, half trapped. Miles kept walking. He had long limbs, and the frame that could have drawn praise on a court, but he had solder burns on his hand. He had different ambition. At third period, the door to room 3B opened on a world that smelled like wire insulation and ambition. Posters of early Mars rovers and robotic arms lined the walls. There were 2 3D printers in the corner, one with a half-finished lattice of filament bird nesting like a failed thought. A whiteboard listed team names from last year's competitions: Sparkworks, Whitmore Dynamics, Voltage Kings. No chalk space advertised new names. Mr. Howard stood at the front like a man who'd been at the front a long time. He wore a crisp shirt and a sleek smartwatch, his beard trimmed like geometry. The room fell quiet when he picked up a marker. He had the kind of voice that always sounded like it had already decided. "Welcome to advanced robotics," he said. "If you were allowed into this room, it's because you've shown promise. We move fast here." Miles took a seat toward the back, but not the last row. He laid his notebook on the desk, the one with the brick-thick logs and margins annotated like a map. A boy with a blonde fade and a monogrammed backpack turned to see who had sat behind him and looked briefly surprised before returning to his laptop. The name on his water bottle sticker read Chad, one of the club leaders if rumor held. On Chad's screen, a subreddit thread gleamed: "Quadruped gate optimization." He typed with the confidence of election result. Howard continued, "This course is a privilege. I expect commitment, not excuses. Many of you have competed under our banner. We took state last year." He smiled, the kind of smile that wields memory as leverage. "We'll do it again if everyone does their part." He moved his eyes across the room the way a scanner moves across a page. When his gaze landed on Miles, it paused just long enough to register a variable. "You are Miles Carter," he said. "Carter," Howard repeated, as if taste testing a new spice. "I don't recall your name from the club roster." "I wasn't in the club," Miles said. He kept his voice steady, not deferential. "I applied for the class." Howard's smile went thin. "We'll see if you can keep up." The sentence landed with a weight that wasn't all academic. A few students exchanged glances. The subtext said this room had regulars and reserves. Miles's fingers tightened around his pencil, until its wood barely sighed. Howard uncapped a second marker, blue this time, and drew a quick sketch of a servo on the whiteboard, narrating torque curves and power constraints. He spoke fast, the way some teachers do when they love their subject and when their audience has always loved them back. Miles followed, nodding at the familiar equations that had kept him company at 2 a.m. all summer: Ziegler-Nichols tuning strategies, backlash compensation, sensor fusion across IMU and optical flow. Nothing foreign, everything alive. He wrote nothing for a while, then began to annotate the sketch with his own corrections, not to show off but to keep his hands from betraying his heartbeat. Halfway through the period, Howard capped both markers and leaned on the desk. "Before we dive deeper," he said, "we'll go around the room and introduce ourselves. Tell us your name, your prior experience, and what you hope to build this year. Be concise. Remember, results matter here." Around the room, the answers came like product pitches. "I'm Emma. I led a team on autonomous pathfinding with SLAM last spring." Applause, restrained. "I'm Logan. My dad's a mechanical engineer at Raytech. We prototyped a custom gripper this summer." A few approving murmurs. "I'm Hannah. I'm interested in soft robotics for biomed applications." Heads nodded. Chad made his introduction without ever looking up from his laptop. "Chad Whitmore, club president. Last year's state winners. We're moving into bipedal stability with a custom control loop. I'm optimizing." His tone was a claim staked in advance of anyone else approaching. As the circle tightened, Miles felt the air in the room change. The forms of meritocracy are graceful, until they aren't. He listened to a boy casually mention the machine shop his uncle let him use, and a girl describe her summer program at a university lab. He thought of his workbench, a refurbished door on sawhorses, in a garage that smelled of detergent and hot asphalt. He thought of the way Denise would prop open the door with a laundry basket, so she could ask if he needed water while her shift shoes air-dried by the fan. When it was nearly his turn, a girl with hoop earrings, Amaya, according to her folder, finished speaking about her interest in human-robot interaction. She looked at Miles and gave a small, encouraging nod, the kind you give someone who's being watched. He did not stand. He didn't clear his throat. He kept his voice low enough that the room had to lean in. "I'm Miles Carter," he said. "I like control systems and locomotion." Howard lifted a hand. "Prior experience?" His pen hovered over the roster. Miles felt the burn mark on his thumb flare from memory. He pictured the night in July when he finally tuned the PID gains to stop the wobble, the moment a test leg held a pose without jittering. He pictured the array of zip ties like stitches, the wires cabling neatly because he had redone them 3 times to make them clean. He had planned to say something modest to keep his claim small enough to pass through the narrow door of permission, but something else moved him now, a current under a calm surface. He looked at the whiteboard, then at the class. He met Howard's gaze last. "I built a robot this summer," he said. The words were simple, an object in the air. For half a breath, they hung there, unremarkable. Then laughter began. First a snicker near the windows, then a cascade, relieved, a sound people make when what they thought might happen is finally happening. It wasn't the raucous laughter of a joke well told. It was the laughter of relief at a stereotype being confirmed. Howard didn't laugh, not exactly. His mouth made a shape that could have been a smile trying not to be seen. Chad chuckled into his sleeve, eyes on his keyboard. "From scratch, huh?" someone said. Disbelief more than question. "Yeah," another voice added, "like Boston Dynamics, but in a garage." Amaya turned in her seat, her face tightening, as if to absorb some of the blow. Miles kept his back straight. He didn't rush to explain components or code logs, didn't open his notebook to show the proof of nights and solder and burns. He held the silence that followed the laughter as if it were a fragile thing he had chosen to carry. For an instant, the classroom felt like a stage with the lights too bright, the audience eager for a punchline that would make their world tidy again. Howard tapped his pen against the desk, gentle, the way a metronome insists. "All right," he said at last, his tone pleasantly dismissive. "Practiced. We'll have plenty of time to see what everyone can do." But the laughter lingered like the smell of overheated plastic. A phone camera winked in the back row. A whisper turned into a text into a thread. Miles felt a steady thrum in his chest that he couldn't quite name. It wasn't fear. It wasn't even anger. Not yet. It was something more elemental, the body's alertness when a storm changes direction. Howard circled back to the whiteboard and underlined expectations. He spoke of deadlines and build sprints, of documentation standards and safety protocols. He moved smoothly, unfazed, the room settling again into its hierarchy. As he talked, a small printer in the corner resumed its mechanical hum, laying down thin lines of filament, an object making itself layer by layer, oblivious to commentary. When the bell finally rang, chairs scraped and chatter reignited. Chad stood and swung his backpack over one shoulder with a practiced flick. As he passed Miles's desk, he leaned close enough that only Miles could hear him. "Bold claim," he said, still smiling. "Can't wait to see it." Miles slipped his notebook into his bag and rose. He didn't answer. The silence felt like a tool he was still learning to use. At the door, Howard paused as Miles approached. "Ambition is admirable, Carter," he said, voice all sugar. "Just make sure it's anchored in reality." Miles met his eyes. "Reality's adjustable," he said softly. Howard's eyebrows lifted a fraction, the smallest record of surprise. "We'll see," he said, stepping aside. In the hallway, the noise of the school surged back. Lockers slamming, plans shouted, the metallic laugh of a vending machine, eating someone's dollar. Miles moved through it, feeling how the story about him had already begun to mutate into something larger and smaller than truth. He passed the empty hooks where the STEM pathway board should have been, and wondered if missing structures were sometimes the most honest ones. He reached his next class door, hand on the handle, when his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number, a link, no text. He ignored it. He wanted the day to be only about circuits, And equations. Wanted the world to behave like math. He wanted for once the variable of him to be allowed into the equation, without correction. Behind him, a voice called his name. Amaya, catching up breath a little short. "Hey," she said, softer now that the hall had thinned. If you did build something, I think that's dope." He nodded. "Thanks." She glanced at the phone in his hand, then back at his face, reading the moment the way some people read blueprints. "People laugh when the world tilts," she said. "They think it'll tilt back." She gave a small, almost embarrassed smile. "Sometimes it doesn't." Before he could answer, before he could decide whether her words felt like a warning or a blessing, the classroom door opened from the inside, a teacher waving him in with the impatience of clocks. He stepped over the threshold, felt it catch against the heel of his shoe, and thought of thresholds in general, how some close behind you, and others never really shut. The day would keep moving. The whispers would calcify into a narrative. But by the time lunch bells would rattle the ceilings, by the time the hallway eyes would decide which version of him to make permanent, something else would happen, something that would force the room to choose between laughter and silence once more. Because the introduction circle wasn't over. Not really. And when the time came to show, not tell, there would be nothing to laugh at, only to record. For now, though, the teacher called for quiet, and Miles opened his notebook to the page where a sketch of a bipedal frame waited like a secret, like a dare, like a promise with a fuse. He drew one more line, a balance correction, a minute adjustment that only he would notice, and closed the cover as if sealing a vow. And later that morning, as the class worked through a warm-up exercise, and Mr. Howard said, "Let's finish introductions. Carter, since you seemed eager," Miles raised his head, felt 30 pairs of eyes tilt, and said evenly, "I built a robot this summer." The room burst into laughter. The sound of 30 students laughing at one person is different. It has weight. It lands on the skin like grit in a cold wind, finds every pore and works its way deeper. Miles felt it coat him, grain by grain, until it was impossible to breathe without tasting it. Some laughed with open mouths, leaning back in their chairs, the kind of laugh that begs others to join in. Others kept it small, lips curled, eyes crinkled, but those were worse. They were the ones who thought they were being polite about it. Phones were already out, screens angled just enough to catch him in frame. The kind of footage that doesn't need a caption because the audience already thinks they know the punchline. Mr. Howard didn't stop them. He didn't say, "Hey, let's hear him out." He didn't even bother with a token. "Let's keep it respectful." Instead, he stood at the front with a smirk that wasn't quite a smile. It was the smirk of a man watching a play he'd already read, certain of how the final act would go. His eyes didn't flash with curiosity or surprise, only with a quiet, satisfied expectation that the room's verdict was correct. From the second row, Chad Whitmore, the golden boy of Westbrook's robotics club, leaned back in his chair with theatrical ease. "Oh man," he said just loud enough for the back row to hear. "This is gonna be good." His voice carried a mixture of amusement and warning, like he was calling dibs on the role of the expert in the upcoming demolition. Miles's pencil sat idle in his hand, the tip pressing a small hollow into his notebook paper. He wasn't sure if he wanted to stand and prove them all wrong right there, or keep quiet and protect what he'd made from being torn apart before it had a chance to breathe. The robot was more than just a machine to him. It was the summer. It was the heat in the garage, the hum of the fan rattling in the corner, the glow of his mother's pride even when she was too tired to say much. It was the proof that you didn't have to be born with the right last name or the right workshop to make something that could walk on its own. But saying all that here, in this room, would be like showing a rare bird to people who thought it was funny to clip wings. The laughter had already written its own version of him, naive, overconfident, the kid who thought a soldering iron was a magic wand. And once people believe a story, they don't like trading it in for a new one, especially if the new one means admitting they were wrong. His mind flashed back to July. The smell of warm asphalt outside, the garage door cracked open to let in air. He had been hunched over the workbench, the bare plywood covered in a scatter of scavenged electronics, circuit boards from dead DVD players, stepper motors pulled from thrift store scanners, wires stripped and twisted together like stubborn vines. The soldering iron had been old, the tip worn down so much that he'd had to sand it to get a clean point. He'd watched hours of YouTube tutorials, pausing and rewinding until the algorithm decided he was an electrical engineering student. Denise would come in around midnight, still in her uniform from the diner, smelling faintly of coffee and fryer oil. She'd lean against the doorframe and ask if he was hungry, even when she was the one who hadn't eaten yet. "Don't burn yourself," she'd say, nodding toward his hands. The burn on his thumb came from a night when he was too excited to notice the iron grazing his skin while he adjusted a joint's alignment. He didn't even feel it until the air hit it. By August, the legs were standing on their own. By late August, they could take slow, shaky steps. And just before school started, K4, name he'd chosen without ceremony, could walk from one side of the garage to the other without tipping over. The first time it did, Denise clapped like it was the 4th of July. "It's like watching a baby walk," she'd said. "Only this one won't need sneakers." Back in room 3B, that memory felt far away, like a soft light barely visible through thick glass. The laughter here was louder than the applause in his garage. Howard finally raised a hand, not to quiet the room out of respect, but to take back control of the performance. "All right, settle down," he said, his tone casual. "Let's keep going." But then, as if reconsidering, he looked back at Miles. "Tell me, Carter," he said, his voice slipping into something almost paternal. "This robot you built, does it actually function?" Miles didn't flinch. "Yes." Howard's eyebrows lifted in mock surprise. "Well, that's impressive. Where is it now?" "At home," Miles said. There was a pause, a space that could have been left alone, but Howard wasn't the type to leave a stage empty. "You know what?" he said, tapping his marker against the desk in a slow rhythm. "If you really have a robot, bring it in tomorrow. Let's all see this masterpiece." The word masterpiece slid out, coated in something oily. The class reacted like an audience given the perfect cue, chuckling, exchanging glances, already imagining whatever spectacle they thought awaited them. Miles could feel every eye in the room pressing against him, weighing his next move. He thought of K4, standing tall in the garage, its black casing scratched from trial runs, its joints still slightly stiff from the latest recalibration. He thought of bringing it here, into a room that had already decided it was a joke. But something in Howard's smirk, something in Chad's leaning confidence, struck a match inside him. The part of him that feared deeper humiliation was there. Yes, but so was the part that hated being underestimated. And the two parts weren't fighting. They were circling each other, deciding which one would lead. He kept his voice steady. "Fine," he said. Howard nodded like a man who had just set a trap and was pleased the bait had been taken. "Excellent," he said. "We'll make time at the start of class. I'm sure we're all eager to see it." The laughter had softened now, replaced by a hum of anticipation. The room wasn't done with him. They were just saving their appetite for tomorrow. As the bell rang and chairs scraped back, Miles slid his notebook into his backpack, his hands slow and deliberate. Chad passed him on the way out, leaning in just close enough to be heard over the noise. "Hope it's worth the hype," he said, the smile in his voice making it clear he didn't believe it would be. Miles didn't answer. He just watched Chad walk away, already surrounded by his usual orbit of admirers. Then he looked at Howard, still by the whiteboard, erasing the servo sketch like wiping away evidence. Tomorrow, the trap would spring. And Miles had just decided he wasn't going to walk into it quietly. Mr. Howard's challenge had been issued. By this time tomorrow, K4 would be in room 3, and for the first time Miles wondered if proving himself might not just silence the laughter, but turn it into something far more dangerous. Carrying the robot into Westbrook High felt like walking into a lion's den while balancing raw meat. The morning air was cool, and yet sweat traced a line down Miles's back as he eased K4 from the trunk of the sedan. The biped stood nearly 5 feet 10, lean as a distance runner, wrapped in matte black panels that showed every scuff from the garage. Under the casing, 24 micro-servos and 8 high-torque actuators weighted like coiled muscle. 2 gyroscopes and an IMU, a cheap one, but tuned within an inch of its life, fed a control loop Miles had rewritten so many times it felt more like handwriting than code. The face was a visor, plain and glassy. Behind it, twin LEDs set dark, like sleeping eyes. Denise had taken an extra sunrise shift and still insisted on helping him load. She straightened the strap on his backpack with the practicality of someone tying down cargo in a storm. "You sure about this?" she asked. It wasn't fear she brought to the question. It was weathered wisdom, the kind that measures cost before courage. "They asked me to bring it," he said. "And I'm tired of leaving parts of myself at the door." Denise nodded once. "Then don't let them name what it is." She touched his arm quickly, the benediction of a busy morning, and climbed into the driver's seat. "Text me when it's over." The robot's weight distributed well across the dolly. Still, every curb felt like a threshold testing both of them. Students were already drifting toward the entrance. Backpacks slung low, voices bright and careless, heads turned as the black silhouette rose from behind a row of cars like a strange visitor. Someone whistled. Someone else let out a drawn dang. A phone pointed his way, red recording dots sticking like a sticker he couldn't peel off. "Yo, is that the Amazon bot?" a boy called. "Nah," another answered, delighted at the chance to direct the scene. "It's the Carter special. He said he built it in his garage." "The garage," someone echoed, and the word softened into a laugh the way handmade becomes homework. He kept moving. The robot's feet, 3D printed shells over rubber pads, tapped the concrete like measured metronome beats. Each tilt, each correction, each pause was choreographed by code he could see, even with his eyes open. Roll error damped by derivative term. Hip yaw nudged by a soft cap to prevent overshoot. It was a language no one could hear, humming beneath the louder one of curiosity turned spectacle. At the double doors, the school resource officer stepped forward like a gate growing legs. Officer Klein's buzz cut was so short, it sharpened his expression. A hand hovered near his radio. "What's this supposed to be?" he asked, tone already primed for authority. "A robot," Miles said, breath even. "I'm presenting it in advanced robotics. Mr. Howard asked me to bring it." Klein's eyes flicked from the machine to Miles's face, then back again. "You got pre-approval from administration to bring this on campus?" He said this like it might answer. "It's for class," Miles repeated. "Third period." Klein's mouth pinched. "We've had incidents, fake threats, kids trying to go viral. You can't just wheel in devices." A small circle formed instantly, as if people were magnets and tension was a metal plate. The phones all tilted up in unison. Amaya stepped out of the stream of students and angled herself beside Miles, not close enough to declare alliance, but near enough that her presence read as witness. "He's in the robotics class," she said, steady. "Howard told him to bring it." Klein considered, thumb rubbing the ridge of his radio. He didn't look at Amaya. "I'll need to call the office." Each second stretched like warm plastic. Miles kept one hand on K4's shoulder plate, feeling the faint give of the EVA foam underneath. The robot was tall but not imposing. Its limbs hung neutrally, palms open. The visor reflected the school in a funhouse way. Murals elongated, faces widened just enough to look strange. The assistant principal arrived, damp with hurry. Miss Brewer wore a laminated badge like a shield. Her smile was the administrative kind, soft at the edges, firm in the middle. "Good morning, Mr. Carter," she said, trying to place herself on the right side of public relations. "Is this for Mr. Howard's class?" "Yes," he said, and kept his voice direct. No apology for existing. No preface. She skimmed the robot like scanning a receipt. "All right, we'll allow it today given the academic context." She glanced at Klein. "Officer, you can escort him to 3B. To Miles, and next time please have a teacher email the office in advance. We have safety protocols." It wasn't really permission, it was a leash they could yank later and call him the one who pulled. Still, he nodded. "Understood." Also, Miss Brewer added, lowering her voice without lowering it, "We'll need you to leave the battery pack disconnected until you're in the classroom." She let her eyes settle on his skin for half a breath too long. "Just a policy thing." "Sure," he said. He hadn't connected it yet anyway. It was always easier to ask forgiveness than for a dead short. Klein walked ahead of them, clearing a path that didn't need clearing but justified his presence. "Make way," he said without urgency, and the words made people move faster anyway. The crowd followed in their own casual orbit, mouths sidelong gossiping as legs kept pace. "You see his mom's car?" a girl whispered. "Looks like he put the whole thing together with yard sale parts." "That tracks," a boy replied. "You can't build a real robot without a lab." "Oh, you can," Amaya said loud enough for both to hear. Eyes forward. "That's what scares people." They rounded the corner by the trophy case. The quarterback's cutout grinned above. Homecoming tickets on sale. In the glass, the reflection of K4 hovered behind Miles like a second version of him. Taller, shinier, untouchable. A boy from the basketball team lifted his phone and panned, narrating. "Westbrook getting a transformer. Place your bets. Make sure it doesn't transform into a bomb." Someone muttered. "Faux casual. The way people test cruelty under the cover of humor." Miles's grip tightened on the dolly handles. He recognized the rhythm, how the joke licenses the fear that refuses to say its own name. He wanted to throw words back that would stick, but the garage had taught him a different muscle. He kept moving, each step deliberate. In room 3B, the buzz sharpened. The door hadn't fully opened before someone in the first row called, "Showtime." Chad stood near the 3D printer, hands in pockets, posture arranged like a billboard for unbothered. He watched the robot roll in, as if a rumor had manifested for his review. Howard glanced up from the whiteboard, a half-finished diagram of a gate cycle mid-arc. His smile did not widen. "Well," he said, capping his marker, "you actually brought it." Klein took a station near the door, arms folded. "Official presence now in exhibit. Proceed," he said to no one. To everyone. Miles eased K4 off the dolly, with the care of a person lowering a sleeping child into a crib. The bot's feet met tile with a muted thunk. Up close, the scuffs on the shin guards told a story of walls too narrow, corners misjudged, a summer learning to walk without a hand to hold. He attached the battery pack with steady fingers, leaving the switch off. A thin lead peeked from the back panel, his safety tether to kill power if something surged. He'd wrapped the kill switch in tape the color of Denise's nail polish, left over from a night she'd sat beside him painting her hands while he debugged. Little bits of home tucked into the machine. Howard stepped closer, hands clasped behind his back like a museum docent. "Class," he said, voice bright, "prepare for a comedy show." A quick laugh bubbled from the middle rows, grateful for a sanctioned emotion. "Mr. Carter, before you power anything, enlighten us. What exactly are we looking at?" "A bipedal platform," Miles said. He kept his tone neutral, the facts a shield. Custom control loop. Cheap IMU, dual gyro redundancy. Torque-limited hip actuators. Vision's primitive. Just depth sensing, but enough for object avoidance. Chad arched an eyebrow. "From a garage," he said like a toast. "From a garage," Miles agreed. "Let the word stand. Let it mean labor. And nights. And not enough money but more than enough stubbornness." "Did you pre-train any models?" a girl asked from the back, genuine curiosity threading her voice. "Not yet," he said. "I wrote most of this from scratch. It's more balanced than brains right now. Like a toddler," someone joked. "Toddlers change the world," Amaya said, and the line hung there, spare and sharp. Howard gestured to the front of the room. "Set it up where we can all see." He raised his chin to the class. "Phones away unless you plan to document your own work this diligently." Half the phones lowered, half stayed, rebellions small enough to pass under the radar. The room smelled faintly of ozone and melted filament. Outside, the bell for second to third period transition barked down the hallway. The door clicked shut behind a straggler. For a half second, everything went quiet in the way rooms do, when electricity anticipates itself. Miles knelt by K4, face level with the blank visor. He could see himself there, eyes steady, mouth set, a boy about to risk something invisible, but heavy. He whispered, "Not for drama but for ritual." "We're okay," he told it. "I tuned you for this room." "Talking to your science fair?" Chad asked, and laughter flickered again. A match struck just to see the flame. Miles stood. "Okay," he said, not to them, to himself. He reached for the main toggle and looked up once more, scanning the room. Howard's mouth had taken on that almost smile again. Klein had the patient stare of a man, waiting to be right. Amaya's hands were clasped on her desk like someone praying without a god. Unexpectedly, Miss Brewer slid in through the door and stood beside Klein, as if some part of her wanted to be present at whatever became public. She tried on a reassuring look and failed to find the right size. "Any last safety notes?" Howard asked, a theater director collecting credit before the curtain. Miles tapped the side panel. "Kill switch here. If it moves toward anyone, I'll cut power." "Or I will," Klein said, and the room made a soft sound, half laugh, half swallow. Miles placed his thumb on the toggle. The plastic edge felt warm from his own skin. He thought just for a heartbeat, about the garage's first steps, about Denise's clap, about the nights when doubt felt like gravity. He also thought about yesterday's laughter and how it had settled into him like dust, and how some dust becomes clay if you add water and knead. He flipped the switch. There was a heartbeat of nothing. Then, inside K4, relays clicked like knuckles. Power flowed through lines he had almond out 100 times, into controllers that woke with soft electronic exhale. The LEDs behind the visor pulsed once, twice, and then the robot's eyes lit up. K4 didn't just work, it woke up like a held breath. finding its way out. LEDs brightening to a steady sentient glow. Then it shifted weight, hips drawing a minute circle, ankles whispering micro-corrections, and took a step. Across the room. Silence fell so hard it rattled. 30 phones rose at once like a field of silver weeds turning toward light. The 3D printer's hum became a baseline. K4 lifted its other foot, knee flexing cleanly, torso counter-rotating with the kind of grace that doesn't apologize for itself. The rubber pads found tile. Servo whine kissed air. Another step. And another. Miles stood beside it, hands slightly out but not touching. Like a parent letting go of a bike seat, and pretending not to be scared. His heart matched the internal clock he'd set for gait phases. Swing, stance, capture step. It was working in foreign gravity, a classroom full of eyes, skepticism tripping like static. K4 kept walking. Amaya's whisper floated. Half prayer, half physics. No way. Chad's chair scraped an inch backward, the confident slouch straightening without permission. Huh, he said too loud to be only a thought. Mr. Howard's smirk thinned to a line someone had erased once, and then drew back weaker. He crossed his arms, posture trying to reclaim command. Okay, he said bright and brittle. It ambulates. He rolled the word like a marble, as if clinical vocabulary could shrink what they were seeing. Bipedal locomotion, basic programming, if you've got your PID tuned. K4 reached the taped line by the whiteboard, the one that marked the front of class boundary for presentations, and stopped as if it knew the rules. Then it pivoted, weight gliding across hips that shouldn't have been able to do it that smoothly on bargain motors, and faced the room. A collective inhale rippled. Even Officer Klein forgot to look skeptical. Look at the compensation, Emma blurted, leaning forward. It's actually catching itself. Howard chuckled softly, a sound carefully crafted to suggest mentorship rather than surprise. Center of mass calculation isn't new. Hobbyists do this in their garages every day. He aimed the last 3 words like darts. It's impressive, for a summer project. The subtext clanged louder than the praise. Miles felt it, but he refused to let it bend his spine. He lifted the small remote, a simple dead man switch with a few preset triggers, kept his thumb hovering but not pressed, and spoke to the room instead of the machine. I'll run a basic walk sequence, then a step height test, then an object avoidance pass, he said. Kill switch is ready. Proceed, Mr. Carter, Howard said, as if granting permission to a weather system. K4 advanced. 4 steps. Pause. The head really a housing for sensors. Upper tilted 3 degrees. Then down 2. Reading depth. Miles tossed a tennis ball into its path. The bot halted cleanly, recalculated, then sidestepped with a precise 2-beat shuffle that made someone in the back gasp outright. That's not basic, Amaya said, barely hiding her grin. Chad regained his volume. Could be pre-scripted animation, he called. I mean an RC car with knees. If you think it's remote-controlled, take the remote, Miles said, the offer level enough to sound like a cliff edge. He held the switch out. K4 stood waiting, legs softly correcting. A laugh skittered around the room, but it didn't land where Chad wanted. He waved the offer away with a joking wince. I'm good. Howard stepped in before the moment could become a scoreboard. Let's not turn a demonstration into a circus, he said, while making sure everyone remembered who'd brought peanuts. Mr. Carter, what's your loop frequency? 90 hertz, Miles said. It spikes to 105 on compensations. Cheap IMU gets noisy, so I smooth readings with a low-pass filter. The derivative term is capped to avoid chasing ghosts. Emma blinked, impressed. You capped D? On a biped? That's gutsy. Had to, Miles said. Or it wobbled like it was laughing at me. He didn't intend the last word to echo, but it did, ricocheting with yesterday's sound. Howard lifted a brow. And your foot trajectory planning? Please don't tell me you're just blending splines. Piecewise Bezier, Miles answered. Knee height adjusted to floor noise. Nothing fancy, just stubborn. The class laughed, not cruelly this time, but in the way people laugh when they recognize the truth. For a fraction of a second, the room felt like possibility. Then the twist, small but sharp. K4 stuttered. Its right ankle whined, a pitch Miles knew too well. The torso pitched 2 degrees too far. One hand lifted reflexively, fingers curling, fingertips skimming open air as though reaching for a rail that wasn't there. A wheel of phones refocused, the oxygen of anticipated failure rushing back in. Miles's thumb hit the ready switch but didn't press it. Was a hair trigger from panic. He watched the bot's knees dip, hips compensate, torso sway, and then balance recovered. It steadied. The LEDs blinked like a heartbeat, calm, returning. Someone exhaled a curse. Relieved and disappointed at once. See? Howard said lightly, grabbing back the narrative. Hobby-grade actuators hit their limits. He smiled at the class, like a professor delivering medicine with honey. Stability at this level is usually fragile. Fragile things can still be real, Amaya murmured, and the sentence landed like a quiet dare. Miles nodded to K4. Okay, he said to the room. Gesture routine. He double-tapped the switch. The robot lifted its right hand and waved. Small, deliberate, not a flail. A kid near the windows squeaked. The bot then bowed, a neat hinge at the waist. Laughter again, but this time the tone bent toward wonder. Miles swallowed the heat, building under his eyes. The bow was for Denise. He'd coded it the night she brought home refried takeout, and told him to make the machine say thank you, even if it couldn't talk. Cute, Chad said. Show it right code. Show me your code, Howard cut in. Smile tidy. Project it. Let's see how you structured the loop. Every eye swung to Miles. He'd expected this, had printed out sanitized snippets, not because he was hiding anything but because the full version was messy, like all living things. He connected his laptop to the projector, the screen blooming with his editor, fonts a size too large to give no one an excuse to pretend they couldn't read. Comments lined the margins, timestamps, notes to self, fragments of humor that didn't invite laughter. Howard stepped closer. You wrote this? His tone was almost casual.
Yes.
Alone? Alone, Miles said, and felt the word bruising on the way out. Chad snorted. Stack Overflow alone, he muttered. Miles scrolled. He pointed to a section where he'd wrestled art from limits. Here, he said, torque limiting while retaining swing speed. It's ugly, but it works. Anna leaned back, lips pursed. That's not Stack Overflow, she said. That's you. Howard's jaw tightened a millimeter. As I said, he pronounced, basic programming. Execution, not innovation. The temperature dropped 2 degrees. He'd called it small without naming why. Miles felt the room collecting the message. If a black kid builds it, it's basic. If a certain other student sketches a paper about it, it's genius. The kind of alchemy that turns achievement into a lesser metal. K4 stood calm, as if unaware of the human weather. Miles shut the laptop, unplugged it carefully, and faced the class again. Obstacle course, he said, voice neutral. He dragged 2 stools into a ragged lane and placed the tennis ball between them. Short pass. Let's end this quickly, Howard said, clapping his hands once. We have curriculum to cover. K4 stepped. Adjusted. Slid. Cleared the ball by an inch. Hips dipping just enough to steal a gasp. The room exploded into involuntary applause. Even Klein's mouth twitched toward a smile before he remembered what job he was performing. Chad didn't clap. He stared. For the first time, his eyes weren't on Miles but on the machine, as if calculating what it meant for a hierarchy he had installed, like software. The corner of his mouth ticked, an error message he couldn't dismiss. Howard interrupted the applause with timing that felt rehearsed. Thank you, Mr. Carter. Good work. Truly. The truly sounded like a spoonful of sugar added to battery acid. Class, take note. Persistence yields results, and someday, if we as a team apply rigor, we might achieve something similar at competition level. Someday? Emma said under her breath. We're looking at someday. Howard heard, or decided he hadn't. Back to gate theory, he announced, lifting the marker. Phones away. Reluctantly, the room tried to return to normal. But normal had moved. The air buzzed with quiet messages being shot under desks, fragments of video already trimmed to neat clips. The first step, the bow, the near fall, the recovery. Miles powered K4 down, the lights dimming to black. He touched the visor, the way someone taps a window before leaving a house. Good job, he whispered. As students filed out at the bell, comments drifted like pollen, some sweet, some poisonous. That was sick. How'd you like how? Did you buy the frame off AliExpress? Be real, who helped you? I mean, it's cute. We'll do better. It looked kinda janky. No offense. None taken. Amaya said for him, the words pegged with a smile that dared you to mistake her. In the hall, strangers he'd never spoken to, gave him nods marked cool or conditional. A freshman asked, "Do you give lessons?" A senior boy in a varsity jacket said, "Respect, bro," then added, quieter, "Must be nice to be the exception." He didn't have a pocket for that sentence. He let it fall behind him. At lunch, the cafeteria was a swarm. He took a seat at the edge, K4 secured in Howard's room, his phone face down beside a carton of milk he didn't want. Amaya slid onto the bench across from him, without asking permission, unwrapping a granola bar with small, deliberate movements. "You doing okay?" she asked. "I'm fine." He realized as he said it that he sounded like a robot taught to imitate calm. "You will be," she said. "But right now you look like a person who just changed the weather and thinks he's the umbrella." He almost laughed. "You have a way of saying things," he said. "So do you," she replied. "You say them with code." She tilted her head at his phone. "You're trending." He flipped it over. The video, one clip from the first step, another from the bow, another from the near fall, had leaped oceanic. A local account had posted it first, captioned "Westbrook's own Iron Man. Garage-built robot walks in class, K4 robotics, genius." The views ticked like a Geiger counter. Duets had started, a kid in a different school reacting, eyes wide, a tech hobbyist pausing and replaying, circling joints with his finger, his notifications stacked into columns. His name, once a whisper that tasted like doubt, now tasted like a headline. He scrolled the comments. The first few were pure wonder. "How? This kid is 17. Teach me." Then the scene tore. "Bet he stole the code. No way he built that without a lab. Be serious. He's black? Lol. Okay, sponsored. Looks like a bomb with legs. School is wild now. Affirmative action robot. Garage? More like gang shed." Amaya saw his face change, the light of the screen cutting sharp angles into it. "Hey," she said softly. Another comment. Not trying to be racist, but, and then it was exactly that. Another, "When did they start letting them into robotics?" Another, "Cool until it malfunctions and does what they do." His throat tightened, like the air had been rationed, and he'd run out. He set the phone down as if it were hot. All that morning, the hard part had been making K4 walk in a hostile room. Now the room had stretched to fit the internet. "You knew it would happen," Amaya said, and she didn't make it sound like a lesson, just a truth. "They don't like their stories updated." Across the room, Chad laughed at something at his table, head thrown back, performative. Then he glanced over, only a flick, and looked away, mouth flattening to the idea that someone else had the camera today. Miles's phone buzzed again. Rapid fire. A DM request pinged from a local news station. Another from a tech influencer. Another from an account with a flag in its bio and an avatar that wasn't a person at all. He breathed out slowly, like lowering a robot off a dolly. "I didn't build it for them," he said mostly to himself. "Then don't hand it over," Amaya said. He nodded, uncertain if that was possible when the handover had already happened in pixels. The cafeteria noise swelled and thinned, the tide of a school day pretending it didn't carry undertow. Miles picked up the phone again, his thumb hovering, not pressing, mirroring the morning's hesitation on a different switch. The view count rolled another 100,000. The top comment refreshed to a new one, more venom in fewer words. By lunch, K4 was going viral on TikTok. And the comments weren't just about robotics. Praise wasn't the only thing that went viral, so did the ugliness. By the time the lunch bell had finished echoing through the hallways, the internet had done what it does best, split itself into believers and doubters, admirers and attackers. At first it had been electric. Local news pages reposted the clip of K4 walking across room 3B. Tech bloggers speculated about the coding challenges. A robotics forum thread titled "17-Year-Old Builds Biped in Garage" began filling with compliments from hobbyists and engineers who wanted to know his loop frequency, his servo brand, his approach to torque balancing. But as the comment count climbed into the thousands, the tone began to shift. "Looks too advanced for a high schooler. He's lying. No way he built that without help. Probably bought it online and slapped his name on it." And then, quietly at first, the thing Miles had hoped wouldn't come. "Figures. Stole it from someone who actually worked for it. Kid looks like trouble. Bet the parts are stolen too." By seventh period, it had gone from whispers to full memes. Someone had taken a screenshot of K4 mid-step, overlaid it with a photo of a mugshot pulled from an unrelated article, and added the caption from crime scene to science fair progress. Another account posted a side-by-side of K4 and a still from an old sci-fi film, where a robot destroyed a city, with the words, "When the school lets him build a robot." It wasn't just strangers. A student Miles barely knew reposted one of the videos with the hashtag "none probably fake" under it. Another wrote, "Cool until it malfunctions and does what they do." The 2 letters, heavy enough to crush. When the day finally spat him back onto the sidewalk, the air felt sharper. Denise's sedan was parked at the curb. The passenger window cracked. He slid in without a word, his backpack wedged between his knees. She glanced over once before pulling away from the school. "Been a long day?" she asked. He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You could say that." Traffic lights passed without conversation. She didn't push. When they reached their street, she turned into the driveway and cut the engine. Only then did she reach into her bag and pull out her phone. She scrolled for a moment, her thumb tight on the glass, then turned the screen toward him. It was one of the memes, the mugshot one. She didn't have to say how she'd found it. These things travel faster than truth. "This, what you wanted?" she asked, voice low. "No," he said quickly. "Of course not. I'm not blaming you, Miles." She cut in, softer now but not gentler. "I just need you to understand something. You built that thing with your hands, your mind, but in their eyes," she tapped the image, not hard but enough to make her point. "One wrong move, one rumor, and you're not the kid who built a robot. You're a threat." He looked away, jaw tight. "I didn't do anything wrong. That's not how the game works." She sighed, leaning back in her seat. "It's not fair, it's not right, but it's the truth. You get too much attention, and the wrong kind starts sniffing around. So you need to be careful." The word careful landed in him like an old coin dropped in an empty jar. He'd heard it his whole life. Careful on the walk home. Careful about who you hang around with. Careful not to make anyone nervous. Now careful with success. That night, the glow of his monitor lit the garage in quiet blues and greens. K4 stood powered down, a shadow against the wall. Miles stared at the growing number of DMs. Some kind, some venom in clean fonts. A YouTube creator had invited him on a live stream to prove the robot's authenticity. A local community group had sent him an open message of support. Sandwiched between them was one from a burner account. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Fraud. Truth comes out." He clicked away from the inbox, forcing himself to focus on code, on the things that could be measured and fixed. But the words clung, ghost-like, between the lines of his loops and function. In the kitchen, Denise was on the phone with someone. Her voice low, her tone the one she used when she was worried, but didn't want him to know. He could hear her say, "No, he's fine. He's fine. Just, it's getting attention." A pause. Yeah, the kind that turned. The next morning started almost normal, until second period, when an announcement crackled over the intercom. "Miles Carter, please report to the principal's office." The room's eyes swung to him. Some curious, some knowing, a few smirking like they'd been expecting it. Amaya glanced at him from across the aisle, her brows lifting slightly, as if to ask without asking if he was okay. He didn't answer, just slid his notebook into his bag, and stood. The walk down the hall felt longer than usual. The office door's glass was clouded, so he couldn't see inside until he stepped through. Principal Rhodes was behind his desk, his tie loose, his expression unreadable. "Miles," Rhodes said, gesturing to a chair. "Have a seat." Miles sat, the cushion stiff. "Is this about the robot?" Rhodes folded his hands. "In a way, yes." He leaned forward slightly. "Want to talk about where it came from?" Miles blinked. "Where it came from?" The principal nodded slowly. "Some concerns have been raised. We just need to make sure the work you're showing is actually yours." Miles felt the words settle like a weight on his chest. This wasn't a congratulations meeting. This was an interrogation, and whoever had raised the concerns wasn't finished yet. "We have to verify that the work is yours," Principal Rhodes said, each word placed carefully, as if he were stacking bricks for a wall he could hide behind. The office smelled like lemon cleaner and photocopy toner. Certificates lined the wall in sober frames. On the bookshelf, a football helmet balanced beside a dusty robotics trophy from 2 years ago. The pairing accidental but loud. Rhodes laced his fingers and leaned in with a practiced sympathy that never touched his eyes. The blinds were half closed, slats throwing measured shadow across the desk like lines on a test he was certain Miles would fail. Miles sat straight. It is mine. Rhodes nodded the way adults nod at children who say impossible things. I hear you. He glanced toward the door as it opened. Mr. Howard slipped in, tie neat, face composed into the shape of professionalism that can hold a knife without anyone seeing the blade. You asked for me, Principal Rhodes. Thank you for coming, Mr. Howard, Rhodes said. Have a seat. Howard didn't sit. He stood just behind Miles's shoulder, close enough that his presence turned into pressure. I wanted to be here, he said. This concerns my classroom. Miles could feel the shape of the scene before any lines were delivered. He had code in his pocket and summer in his bones, and suddenly none of it felt like proof. Rhodes cleared his throat. We've received concerns. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside, screenshots fanned out, comments accusing Miles of fraud, side-by-sides of K4 with a bipedal kit sold online, a thread from a local parent group asking whether the school vets projects for authenticity. Someone had circled a marketing photo in red and typed, looks identical. Howard tapped the page, gentle, almost tender. There's a commercially available chassis called the Hexamotion K-frame, he said. A lot of hobbyists buy it. They film it walking. It resembles what we saw in class. Miles looked at the circled photo. The kit in the picture had glossy white shells. K4 wore matte black, angles softer where his printer had insisted on compromise. The joint geometry was similar. That was true. But similarity isn't theft. It's the consequence of physics and gravity and what legs need if they're going to pretend to be legs. I designed my own, he said evenly. I used open source references for math, sure, but the frame is mine. The code is mine. Howard's smile was small and condescending, like a pat on the head that never makes contact. I'm not accusing you of stealing outright, he said. I'm saying it would be understandable if a student of your age, and his pause was delicate, intentional, background needed help. The word didn't echo, but it didn't have to. It sunk through the room's air and settled on Miles's skin like dust. My background is that I work, Miles said. His voice didn't rise. Do you want to see how much? He pulled his notebook from his backpack, the thick one with build logs and timestamps and smeared pencil at the corners. He laid it open on the desk. Then he slid his laptop next to it, waking the screen to a directory tree with folders labeled by dates. Gate loop v7, Common try 2, heel strike fix. Git commits bloomed in a timeline like rings in a tree. June 12. Here, he said. Every change. Comments. The parts list too. Receipts from the thrift store and the maker swap. I can explain any of it. For a moment, the evidence made its own weather. Even Rhodes leaned forward, eyes scanning, impressed in spite of himself. Howard didn't. He picked one page at random and read the margin note aloud, as if it were a confession. Ugly fix, but it works. He lifted his eyes. That's not rigorous. It's honest, Miles said. I can show you why it's ugly and how I plan to refactor once it's stabilized. I brought it to class because you told me to. You told me to bring it. Howard moved around to sit at last, posture perfect. We also have policies, he replied. Mr. Carter, there's a difference between tinkering and academic integrity. Rhodes steepled his fingers. We are not making any determinations today, he said, voice oiled. But we must consider the possibility that parts of this work may not be original, or that outside assistance was involved. Outside assistance? Miles repeated. He could feel the words heating in his mouth. Like what? Like my mother holding a flashlight at 1 a.m.? Like YouTube videos? Because everyone uses them. Even you tell students to watch them. Howard slid another page forward. A printout of a forum thread. A user named VoltKing, posting code fragments for balance loops. A few snippets looked like cousins to Miles's functions. This is what we mean, Howard said. Derivative caps. Bezier curves. Your words mirror a lot of existing content. Because the math doesn't change when I write it, Miles said. I didn't copy-paste. I learned and built. That's what school is. He pointed to his comments, his jokes, his mistakes, the midnight edits when the variables named themselves after whatever song Denise had been playing in the kitchen. You can't fake this kind of mess. Howard's mouth twitched at the corner, irritation slipping past his veneer. You'd be surprised what can be fabricated. The door opened again. Ms. Brewer stepped in, eyes already apologizing. Mrs. Carter is here, she said. Denise entered like a storm that had decided for now to keep its reign. She wore her diner polo, hair pulled back, worry flattening her voice into steel. You called me out of work, she said, not angry, just taking inventory. Tell me why. Rhodes offered the well-practiced smile he reserved for parents. Miss Carter, we're just discussing a matter of verification concerning your son's project. There's been a lot of attention. We want to ensure everything meets our standards. Denise didn't sit. She put a hand on Miles's shoulder. Our standard is the truth, she said. What's yours? Howard gestured toward the folder. We have evidence that similar robots exist, and are often purchased fully assembled. We're simply asking Miles to prove the work is his. He's showing you proof, Denise said, eyes flicking to the open laptop to the notebook with bruised edges. You're asking for a miracle. Rhodes raised both hands, palms up. Peacekeeper. We're not accusing anyone. But the district has had issues before. Students taking credit for work that wasn't theirs. Devices introduced without proper approval. Liability questions. There it was. The word schools reach for when they need cover. Liability. It hangs like a curtain you can't see through, and aren't allowed to move. Then talk to me about approval, Denise said. He told his teacher. He brought it in because his teacher invited him. Howard took a deep breath, converted it into a measured tone. I invited him to share a project. Yes. I did not invite a device of uncertain origin that could create a safety issue. Uncertain origin? Miles repeated, stunned into a small laugh he couldn't help. It originated in our garage. Howard nodded toward the laptop again. Open your main loop, he said. Miles did, scrolling to the heart of it. Here, Howard leaned in, reading lines that weren't written for his eyes. It's clean, he admitted. Then smoothly, clean can be copied. Or learned, Denise said, before Miles could speak. He's been learning since he was 10, from whatever he could get his hands on. We couldn't afford camps. We didn't need them. Unexpectedly, Rhodes slid a sheet across the desk, another policy document. There's also the matter of our academic honesty agreement, he said gently. You signed it in September, Mr. Carter. It requires students to disclose any external contributors. I don't have external contributors, Miles said, unless you mean the guy on YouTube in Brazil who soldered something once 20 minutes faster than I did, and taught me a trick. Do I disclose that? Do I write thank you internet on the top? Be reasonable, Howard said. Did anyone else build with you in the garage? Any mentor? Any company? Company, Denise repeated. What company would be in our garage? Howard tilted his head. A parent of a classmate, perhaps. A neighbor. We all know Mr. Whitmore's father is an engineer at Ray Tech. He mentors students occasionally. It's not unheard of. The twist arrived like a push from behind. Miles felt heat crawl up his neck. Chad hasn't been in my house, he said. No engineer has stood at my bench. Then there should be no issue, Rhodes said softly. We'll conduct a routine review. We just need to look through your files, check device serials, maybe inspect your laptop, image your drive to confirm timeline integrity. He made it sound like a dental cleaning. Standard procedure. What? Denise's hand tightened on Miles's shoulder. You're not imaging his personal computer without consent, she said. And not without me present in writing. It would speed things up, Howard said, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't belong in a mouth. If everything is as he says, he'll be cleared. Miles looked from face to face. He could live code on the spot. He could disassemble K4 on the principal's carpet and diagram every bolt. He could sign into his Git and open 6 months of insomnia. But none of that would satisfy people who had already decided what story they wanted to tell. Let me demonstrate again, he said. Live. Pick a problem. I'll solve it here. No scripts. Howard shook his head. This isn't a talent show, he said. We're verifying academic integrity, not applauding tricks. The insult was wrapped in policy, but it cut anyway. Denise exhaled through her nose. Slow. The way you do when you're standing between your child and a storm you can't stop. You're teaching him a lesson, she said to no one, and everyone. Just not the one you think. Rhodes sat back, the posture of a man about to say the thing he rehearsed. Given the volume of public attention, and the questions raised, we must protect the integrity of our programs, he said. He picked up a printed letter and slid it forward, face up. Effective immediately, Miss Carter is suspended from the robotics club and from lab access pending investigation. The room went quiet. Even the copier in the next office seemed to stop mid-spool. Miles stared at the paper. The words blurred at the edges. the way text does right before tears you refuse to produce. He didn't touch it. You're suspending me for building a robot, he said, half statement, half astonishment. For failing to follow protocol, Rhodes replied, gentle as a lullaby given to an empty crib. This is temporary. Once we verify, again that word, polished now, we'll revisit. Howard added, almost kindly, you can still attend class, but until we complete our review, you will not represent Westbrook in any competitive or public capacity. We need to be sure. Denise straightened. We're leaving, she said, voice even. You'll hear from me in writing. You will not touch his laptop until I've spoken with someone at the district. Howard's gaze ticked toward the door, to the hallway where 1,000 narratives were already waiting. Understand, Miss Carter, he said. If we cannot complete verification, the district may have to escalate. We'd like to avoid that. Miles rose. The chair legs scraped the floor with a sound like a skidding brake. He didn't look at Howard. He didn't trust what his face would do if he did. He tucked the notebook into his backpack and closed the laptop with care. The care was for himself. At the doorway, Rhodes said, Miles, one more thing. They turned. Rhodes lifted his chin at the manila folder. We'll need K4 brought to the office tomorrow morning, for secure storage during the review. No, Denise said. You'll inspect it with us present. It doesn't leave our sight. Rhodes's smile didn't fully reach back. Of course, he said. If you don't bring it, we'll have to note non-cooperation. Non-cooperation. The word slid into Miles's pocket like a stone. They stepped into the hallway, a corridor that suddenly felt too narrow for breath. Students flowed around them, unaware and entirely aware. Amaya stood near the water fountain, eyes searching his face, reading the verdict without the paper. He gave the smallest shake of his head, her jaw set. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a vibration that felt like a hand tugging his sleeve. He checked it, a notification from a local news app. Student inventor suspended pending investigation at Westbrook High. The article was already live. Someone had leaked faster than the bell. Another buzz. A DM from an account with a blue check and a black and white profile picture he didn't recognize. This is Ava Grant. I saw your video. Don't sign anything. He looked up at Denise. She read his face the way you read weather on a horizon. What? She whispered. He turned the screen so only she could see. Her eyes widened a fraction, then flicked back toward the office door. Behind it, Rhodes and Howard were still in their chairs, still sure of their story. In Miles's hand, a new story had just knocked. And down the hall, the robotics lab door clicked locked behind him, the sound neat and final as a gavel. He was officially suspended from the robotics club pending investigation. And before the first rumor finished its lap around the school, a stranger with power had just told him not to sign a single thing. They didn't call it a breakthrough. They called it a controversy. By the last bell, a local station had already run a segment. A bright lower third chirped robot controversy at Westbrook High, as if scandal were the primary engineering metric. The anchor's voice swung between caution and titillation. A student claims to have built a walking robot in his garage, but questions remain. Did he construct it himself, or did he buy it? Our exclusive interview with school officials coming up. The video they used was the bow, the one part that made the machine feel almost human. They looped it until the grace felt like a taunt. Denise watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, apron still on from the diner. The anchor cut to a quick man on the street outside the school. Kids mugged for the camera, a few shrugging that it was cool, a few chuckling that it looked Then the clip stuttered into Chad Whitmore standing in front of a trophy case, hair perfect under fluorescent light like even the static was on his side. I mean, it was impressive, Chad said, careful to look generous. And, I'm proud of our program. But you know, projects like this usually take a team and a lab. It's totally possible he had outside help. He lifted his hands, palms open, innocence rehearsed. If so, that's fine. Credit where it's due. Outside help, Denise echoed at the television, the phrase landing on the counter like a dropped fork. Miles stood behind her chair, watching his work turned into rumor, with lower thirds. The reporter's last line. The district says it is reviewing potential policy violations, and the students' access to lab spaces has been paused pending the outcome. Arrived with a stock image of a caution sign, not a robot, not a notebook full of tireless handwriting. A caution sign. His phone buzzed on the table, notifications stacked like fallen dominoes. Messages from numbers he didn't recognize. Text from classmates he did. A few private notes from strangers that felt too kind to trust. And then another folder of shadows, the DMs with skull icons and flag avatars, insisting he was a thief, a danger, a fraud. One anonymous email had no greeting. Just a subject line, "You're finished." The body was 3 sentences. "We know kids like you. You take and take. Don't bring that thing back to school. Next time it walks, we'll make sure it never stands again." No signature. An IP trace would lead to a shrug. "Block and archive," Denise said, measuring calm into each syllable, so it wouldn't curdle into fear. She set her phone down and met his eyes. "This is what happens when the story leaves your hands, baby. It gets told for you." "I didn't ask for this," he muttered. "You built something alive," she said. "It asks for this on its own." He wanted to argue that it didn't. That K4 was just code, and parts in the garage's summer heat, dried into plastic. Not a symbol. But the TV was already setting its terms. A new graphic bled on screen. "Parent worries. Is it safe?" A cropped voice from a PTA meeting clip. "I heard it almost fell on a child." Miles blinked. He could pinpoint the exact corrective sway they misremembered. It hadn't inched within 4 feet of anyone. The unexpected twist arrived inside a familiar envelope. The school's official email. From Westbrook Communications. Subject: statement regarding robotics program. The language was sterile, clean like stainless steel. "We are proud of our students' passion. Due to safety protocols and academic standards, we are temporarily limiting access to lab spaces during a routine review. We will continue to center student safety and integrity." Not a single sentence with his name. Not a single sentence with the word innovation. Denise read it twice, then once more, as if extra passes might reveal the secret message. "Safety and integrity," she repeated. 2 words that mean we can do anything we want. He opened his notebook to prove to himself he was still real. June's first entry with shaky sketches. July's PID notes marching along margins. August's messy joy when the first full walk lasted 13 seconds longer than the previous night. On the last page he'd written 3 words for himself. A private pep talk at dawn. "You did this." He traced them with his thumb like braille. His phone buzzed again. A local radio producer. "A morning show just looking to hear your side." An email from a glossy tech blog, offering to consult on how to handle the messaging for a fee. Another anonymous DM titled "Stay in Your Lane," with a picture of a shattered laptop. "Turn it off," Denise said. "Just for an hour. Eat something." She tapped the leftovers on the stove. Fried rice jumping twice as if to volunteer. "You'll think better with food inside you." He nodded, but didn't move. The garage called the way it always did when the world felt impossible. A space where problems had syntax and solutions weren't opinions. He stepped out, and the air shifted. The soft oil and ozone smell felt like a friend with sleeves rolled up. K4 stood where he'd left it, the visor reflecting a slice of the overhead bulb. He plugged into the laptop and skimmed the logs compulsively, as though the machine might have felt the comments too. Denise hovered in the doorway, leaning on the frame like she had the night of the first bow. "You ready for more of this?" she asked, not accusing, not pleading. It won't get kinder just because it's true. Miles sat on the stool and rubbed the solder burn on his thumb. "I thought if it walked in front of them, it would change something." "It did," she replied. "Just not the part that changes quietly." He glanced at his phone, still face down, still vibrating at intervals. Before he could look again, the garage light shivered. A truck rolled past outside, and sent shadows moving across the far wall, a herd of dark shapes migrating. It was oddly soothing, proof that not everything kept a screenshot. The doorbell chimed. Denise shot him a look, "Do not move," and went to answer. He heard voices, one formal, one friendly to the point of act. When she returned, 2 people were behind her. A reporter with a smile built for thumbnails, and a cameraman carrying a shoulder rig like a test of strength. "Evening," the reporter beamed. "So sorry to stop by unannounced. I'm Alyssa from Channel 7. We're doing a longer feature tonight, and wanted to give Miles a chance to respond on camera. We wouldn't want the narrative to be one-sided." She said the last word with such self-congratulation, it sounded like dessert. Denise's hand was already up. "We're not on your show," she said. Alyssa leaned in, confiding. "We're independent," she whispered, the word bruised by misuse. "We want to celebrate him. But we need something from him." "A quick soundbite?" "Soundbites ruin people," Denise replied. "They're designed to—" Miles stepped between them before the air got crowded with politeness. "No camera in the house," he said. "If you have questions, email them." Alyssa softened her voice into empathy. You're getting a lot of attention. If you don't tell your story, other people will. She caught herself smiling at the perfect use of a perfect line. They already are, he said. That's the problem. She tried once more, and then retreated gracefully, handing over a card just in case, and promising neutrality on the segment he already knew had a title card waiting. When the door closed, Denise exhaled. They'll be back, she said. They'll bring a longer lens, he answered. The threats thickened by dinner, an email threatening to visit the garage, a comment under the local station's Facebook post. If this kid's lying, he should be suspended from school permanently. A message from an unlisted number he didn't answer, voicemail transcribed. I know where you live. The words crawled under the door like smoke. He drafted a reply to the unknown DM he'd received in the principal's hallway. This is Ava Grant. Don't sign anything. He typed. Thank you. Who gave you my info? Deleted it. Typed, what should I do? Deleted it. Typed, is this really you? Deleted that too. Then he set the phone face down again, because indecision felt better than begging. A new story found him anyway. A friend texted a screenshot of Chad's dad in a suit on a board, smiling beside a banner, Westbrook Foundation Gala. Underneath, the caption, proud corporate sponsor Raytech. The friend wrote, did you know? It was the kind of detail people mention when the chessboard suddenly looks different from above. Unexpected twist. Not so unexpected after all. The man who wrote checks to the school also employed the boy who suggested outside help. The school's statement suddenly read like a script with stage notes. Emphasize safety. Question integrity. Protect donors. Denise saw the photo and set her jaw. Conflict of interest, she said, visible anger carefully leashed. Or just interest, he replied. And then staring at the smug two-shot of Chad and his father, he registered a colder thought. Maybe the frame of the story wasn't accidental. Maybe this was the plan for anyone who tried to stand without permission. He turned back to the laptop and opened a new document titled Press Notes. He didn't want to write them. But even code needs comments. If you expect anyone to understand it years from now. He listed facts. Dates, logs, times, failure points he'd fixed. The scrapyard on 8th Street where he found the stepper with enough torque to make the ankle behave. The thrift store clerk who'd thrown in wires for free after hearing about the project. Truths so ordinary they would bore a camera. The house quieted. The light in the garage shifted to a warmer yellow. The bulb was old, like all the reliable things here. Denise placed a bowl beside him. Fried rice that smelled like home. Or close enough. Eat, she said. Then sleep, then we figure it out in the morning. His phone, face down, trembled again. 1 vibration, pause. 2. Like a nervous heartbeat. He almost let it pass. Then he flipped it over. Unknown number. Then 3 dots, as if the number itself were thinking. The name populated a second later, the way phones sometimes do when they reach for a cloud. Incoming call, Ava Grant. He stared at the screen. Denise, reading his face, lifted her chin as if to say answer. Miles swallowed, thumb hovering over accept, the same place it had hovered over the K4 power switch, over the remote, over 100 decisions that felt smaller until they weren't. He tapped the green circle. The call connected and a voice crisp as a clean solder joint came through the speaker. Miles, it said. This is Ava. The voice on the other end of the line carried a strange mix, sharp like glass, but warm enough that you didn't mind picking it up. Miles, this is Ava Grant. He'd seen her face before on tech blogs, in a Forbes 40 under 40 list. Denise had shown him once with a proud little C. It's possible in her voice. Founder of a robotics company that made prosthetic limbs for veterans. Keynote speaker at every conference with the word future in the title. Black, female, successful in a field where people still treated those 3 words as mismatched puzzle pieces. Miles sat on the stool in the garage, laptop in front of him, K4's matte black frame looming just in his peripheral vision. Hi, he said, which felt absurdly small. I saw your video, she said, cutting through his hesitation. And I saw the news story. A beat. And I saw the district's statement. Let's just say, I've seen this play before. Denise had moved closer, folding her arms but tilting her head to hear. I know you're under fire right now, Eva continued, but that's not why I'm calling. Every year my foundation sponsors a handful of young inventors to present at the National Youth Tech Expo in New York. It's the largest gathering of innovators under 21, hundreds of journalists, investors, engineers, educators. I want you to be one of them. The sentence landed like a dropped gear, solid, heavy, and immediately in motion. Miles blinked. You want me to present K4 in New York? Yes, she said simply. The expo is in 3 weeks. We'll cover travel, lodging, the works. You'd have 10 minutes on stage in front of the most influential people in tech. You'd get to show your work without the filter of your school or whatever agenda they're running. He looked at K4, still powered down, still holding yesterday's posture like a frozen photograph. The idea of it walking across a stage in New York felt impossible, and yet inevitable all at once. But another image crowded in, the sound of laughter in room 3B, the snickering outside help comments, the principal's verify like a rubber stamp on his forehead. What if they laugh again? He asked quietly, more to himself than to her. Eva didn't hesitate. They laughed because they were afraid of you proving them wrong. Fear always dresses itself as mockery. It's easier to hide behind a joke than admit someone just beat you at your own game. Her tone was firm, but not patronizing. She spoke like she'd stood in this exact spot before, on the fault line between being underestimated and being watched too closely. You have something real, Miles, she continued. And I'm not talking about the robot. I'm talking about the discipline, the focus, the fact that you even finished something that complex in the first place. Do you have any idea how rare that is? He shrugged, feeling the weight of both pride and doubt. Sometimes I think it's just stubbornness. Good, she said. Stubbornness built half the tech you see in the world today. The other half was built by people who knew someone stubborn enough to finish it. Denise cleared her throat gently. What's the catch? No catch, Ava said. You just have to agree to present. We'll handle logistics, mentorship sessions, even PR coaching if you want it. And I'll personally walk you through how to deal with the attention, both good and bad. The bad part still lingered in his head. This could make it worse, he said. If I go, and I mess up, it's not just my school laughing. It's the whole internet. That's true, she admitted. But if you go and you succeed, it's not just your school watching, it's the whole internet. The same people who doubt you now will be quoting you later. And the ones who still don't believe, they'll have to work twice as hard to pretend you don't exist. He let that sit for a moment. The garage was quiet except for the faint buzz of the old bulb overhead. Think about it, Ava said. I'll send over the details tonight. You have until Friday to decide. But for what it's worth, you're already in the spotlight. Might as well stand on a stage while you're there. When the call ended, Miles just sat there, the phone still warm in his hand. Denise didn't speak right away. She just looked at him with the kind of expression that weighed the risk before the dream. New York, she said finally. That's big. It's huge, he said, and terrifying. She smiled faintly. Good. If it didn't scare you, it wouldn't be worth it. The next day at school, the atmosphere was different. Word of the expo invitation hadn't gone public. Ava's team was careful, but something in his posture must have changed, because people noticed. Some were still whispering, but others were watching with an edge of curiosity, like maybe there was more to the story than they'd been told. He made it through most of the day without incident, until third period. Mr. Howard was already at the whiteboard when Miles walked in, diagramming a servo system with exaggerated strokes. His eyes flicked to Miles, then back to the board. The smirk was gone today. In its place was something colder, more calculating. Halfway through the period, he called for a quick break. Students milled, checked phones, whispered. Howard motioned for Miles to join him near the supply cabinet. I hear you've been talking to people, Howard said, voice low. Miles kept his face neutral. People talk to me. Howard's gaze sharpened. Let me be clear. I know about the expo. Word gets around when a student starts booking stages. Miles didn't confirm or deny. Howard stepped closer, lowering his voice to a whisper. Only the fluorescent hum could overhear. If you go through with this without clearing it through proper channels, you're going to regret it. I will make sure the truth comes out before you set foot on that stage. There was no mistaking the weight behind truth. It wasn't about facts. It was about narrative, about control. You mean your version of it? Miles said quietly. Howard smiled, without warmth. I mean the version people will believe. The bell rang, pulling the room back into motion. Students shuffled to their seats, unaware that a line had just been drawn between two people who could not both win. Miles returned to his desk, his heart pounding, not with fear exactly, but with the sharp awareness that the road to New York would not be a straight line. Howard now knew about the expo. and he just promised to tear Miles down before he even got there. 2 days before the expo, the garage smelled wrong. Miles knew the scent of melted filament and warm solder, the way a baker knows when a loaf is done. This was different, sharp and metallic, a bitter sting under the tongue. He flicked on the overhead bulb, and the light carved the room into amber and shadow. K4 stood where he'd left it after school, legs locked, visor dark. A thin thread of smoke had dried into the air like a past tense. "Please don't," he whispered to nobody. To everything. He set the laptop down, connected the cable, and tried to boot the diagnostics. The status line shuddered halfway and froze. He reached behind the back panel, thumb finding the power toggle by muscle memory, and felt heat still coiled in the casing. He slid off the matte shell with a careful practiced tilt. The smell jumped. The main control board bore a charred blossom, just off the voltage regulator. A tiny crater where a component had been. Nearby, silicone wires had fanned into stiff, blackened threads. A fuse he'd added for safety had been replaced badly, with a piece of copper wire bent like a hairpin. It had turned the fuse into a lie. "Miles?" Denise asked from the doorway, voice small because she could hear the silence inside his. "What is it?" He swallowed. "It's fried." She stepped closer, pulling the hem of her shirt over 2 fingers and using it to lift a wire gently, the way people touch something sacred and ruined. "Can you fix it?" He did the math instinctively. Hours left. Parts on hand. What could be scavenged from the box of nearly good enough? "Maybe," he said, "if it was just the regulator. But this," he pointed to a board scuffed in a way his own clumsiness never made. "Someone bypassed the fuse." Denise blinked. "You didn't do that." "No." She scanned his face. When could it have happened? He thought of the last 48 hours like a hallway with locked doors. School had insisted K4 be stored on campus during the review. Yesterday, under Ms. Brewer's watch and Officer Klein's boredom, he'd wheeled K4 into the lab for a non-invasive inspection. He'd stayed in the room answering questions that were statements in disguise, while Howard stood a polite distance away as if to keep clean. At the end, they told him the bot would be securely stored in the lab's cage overnight, pending a district tech's arrival. "It was fine when I wheeled it out this afternoon," Miles said slowly. "We went straight from school to the diner for your shift. Came home. I brought it into the garage, then took a shower, 30 minutes tops." He looked at the fried board. 30 minutes wasn't enough time to become this. Denise's jaw set. "Call Ava," she said. "Now." He dialed with fingers that didn't feel like his. The phone rang once. Ava answered, voice crisp as a clean cut. "Tell me." He gave her the details with clinical detachment, the only way to stop the panic from turning the words into noise. When he said bypassed fuse, she inhaled sharply. "That's not an accident," she said. "Who had access?" "School," he said. "The lab." She didn't waste time swearing. "Okay. I'm sending a team, 2 engineers and a security consultant to your house now. They'll bring spare parts. We'll try to resurrect tonight." His shoulders dropped a fraction. "Thank you." "And Miles?" Ava added, voice softening. "This is bigger than a mean kid. Keep everyone out of that garage until they arrive. Don't touch anything else." He hung up and set the phone down, like it had a pulse. Denise nodded once, and locked the side door, then the front, then the deadbolt. She moved through the house purposefully, the way you do when you can't fix a thing, but you can at least make the perimeter respect you. Miles crouched by K4, and took photos of every singed edge, every unnatural angle, the copper hairpin pretending to be protection. In one corner of the board, a faint smear of something shiny had dried, a residue he didn't recognize. He swabbed it with a cotton tip from the first aid kit, and sealed it in a sandwich bag, like a detective on TV, laughing once at himself because what else could you do? The doorbell rang 20 minutes later. Denise checked the peephole, then opened. 2 women and a man stood on the porch under the porch light's patient glow. One woman carried a hard case like a portable altar. The other had a messenger bag slung crossbody, and eyes that scanned details as if reading code written on the air. The man wore a dark blazer and the posture of someone who notices exits, without letting you see him notice. "I'm Letta," the first woman said. "Electrical. This is Priya, controls. And Tom, security." "Ava said you were coming," Denise said. Then quieter, raw and without preface. "Thank God." They moved through the house with contained urgency. In the garage, Leda knelt before K4 the way a surgeon does before a heart they can't afford to lose. You did clean work, she murmured to Miles, eyes tracking cable ties and labeled terminals. That's going to help. Tom took out a small flashlight and swept the corners. The window latch, the side door. Do you have motion sensors? He asked. We have locks, Denise said. And neighbors with opinions. He nodded, unjudging. Okay. Priya opened Miles's code on the laptop, scrolling with a quiet hum. Your loop's beautiful, she said, like saying I see you in a dialect he understood. Let's get you a heartbeat back. They worked, the room's rhythm settling into that midnight tempo, where panic gets tired and discipline takes over. Leda desoldered the damaged regulator, wicking away old solder like cleaning a wound. She held the bent copper up with tweezers. This is malicious, she said. Someone replaced a fuse with a wire. That's not ignorance. That's intent. Miles nodded, throat tight. Priya ran a quick software integrity check. Your last commit was this afternoon? She asked. Right after school, he said. Minor change to heel strike smoothing. She clicked her tongue. Good. No rogue edits since. Tom stepped back in from the yard. Windows locked. No pry marks, he reported. Do you have cameras? No, Denise said. We have K4. Apparently that's news enough. He gave a small, sympathetic smile. Sometimes deterrence is theater. Miles sat on the stool and answered questions as they came. Wire gauge, source of the IMU, why he'd cap derivative, with each back and forth a thread wound between them that felt like something beyond rescue, something like recognition. When Leda finally soldered the last leg of the new regulator into place, Priya flipped the breaker on the test power supply. Let's go gentle, she said. No battery yet. The LED on the board flickered once, then held steady. Miles let out a breath he hadn't admitted he was holding. Okay, Leda said. Now the rest. They moved through the internals, like a team reciting a litany. Capacitors checked, grounds verified, lines traced and blessed. Priya tapped out a command, and K4's servo array made a faint, inquisitive chirp. Hey there, she whispered to it, as if coaxing a skittish animal. Then the garage light caught on something. A tiny glint inside the torso cavity, tucked near the power distribution bus. Leda paused. What's that? She slid a slim, hooked tool into the space and teased out a small black pebble with a ribbon antenna. It sat in her palm, inert and accusatory. Miles leaned in. What is it? Tom's face changed. He took it from her gently, held it between two fingers, and flipped it over. A white sticker no bigger than a freckle sat on the back, printed with a QR squiggle and a serial code. Tracker, Tom said. The word fell like a hammer on glass. Passive BL. Cheap. Common. Uses any phone nearby to ping its location. Some can record movement profiles. Denise went still. How would that get inside? Tom looked at the mounting screws. Not through your nice neat covers, he said. Somebody had it open. Recently. Miles felt the room tilt. The lab, he said. They had it overnight. Leda frowned at the sticker, then at Priya. You see the vendor? Priya peered close. Looks like an OEM label, she said. Could be from any reseller. Tom slipped the device into a small Faraday pouch. We'll try to trace the registrations, he said. If whoever activated it was sloppy, we'll get a hit. But even if not, this, he lifted the pouch slightly, is our proof of tampering. Denise's voice went low and fierce. They stored him in a cage in that lab, she said. Called it secure. Tom nodded. Cages keep honest people honest. Miles stared at the empty space where the tracker had been. Sickness lifted through him like a tide, slow and unstoppable. They wanted to know where I kept it, he said. And or who you met with, Priya added gently. Or where you'd be in New York. The thought cracked open something colder than anger. The sabotage had felt personal. Like spite. The tracker felt strategic. It said the quiet part out loud. This isn't just about a grade, or a grudge. Someone wanted I. Could Chad do this? Denise asked, voicing the name that had been a low beep in all their heads. Miles imagined Chad's smirk, his practiced charm, his father's donor plaques. He also imagined the clumsy way Chad held a soldering iron in lab. How he preferred CAD to burning fingertips. He could want it, Miles said. But this, he nodded at the Faraday pouch, doesn't look like a hallway rumor. It looks like a plan. Tom's phone buzzed. He checked the screen, and his brow furrowed. Heads up, he said. There's a patrol car idling at the corner. Denise's body stiffened. We didn't call them. They might have heard about a device at this address, Tom said. Don't answer questions. You're under no obligation to entertain curiosity. The doorbell rang. Miles's heart, obedient till now, stumbled. Denise straightened her shoulders and went to the door. Tom a respectful step behind her. Officer Klein stood on the porch under a drizzle the weather hadn't announced. Hat pulled low, professional friendliness turned up one notch too high. Evening, he said. Just doing a courtesy check. We had a call about unusual activity. What activity? Denise asked. Her voice was polite. Her eyes were locked. Large equipment moved. Klein said. Lights on late. You know how neighbors can be. He smiled. Mind if I take a quick look? Just to make sure everything's safe. No, Denise said. Klein blinked, caught between script and reality. Ma'am? No, you cannot come in, she repeated, gentle enough to be undeniable. We're fine. We're busy. Tom stepped forward. Officer, he said, tone professional, badge of none but the badge of confidence. I'm with the Grant Foundation. We're conducting a repair on a disabled educational device. We'll be here for a while. If there's a specific complaint, you can direct it to Grant's office in the morning. Klein's eyes ticked to Tom's face, then to the garage behind Denise, where solder smoke sneaked out despite better manners. He weighed something, then tipped his hat. All right then. Good evening. He lingered a half-second too long on Miles, who had drifted into the doorway without his permission, then turned back to the cruiser. When the door closed, Denise leaned against it, exhaling. They're watching us from porches and offices, she said. And labs. Let them watch, Letta said, in the tone of someone who has decided where the fight is. We'll give them something worth seeing. They returned to the garage with a new urgency made of anger and focus braided. Battery test, Priya said. Low voltage. Miles handed her the pack like medicine. The line steadied. The board sang the soft private song of circuits, doing what they're meant to. Okay, Letta said. Moment of truth. They lifted K4 by the shoulders and tilted its torso upright. The servos whirred. Polite again. A chorus clearing their throats. Priya tapped the keyboard, and the LEDs behind the visor pulsed awake. Hey, Miles whispered. The way you greet someone after a bad dream. K4 shifted weight, little ankle muscles chattering as equilibrium returned to the room. It took a half-step, careful, obedient, then settled again. Walk can wait, Priya said. We want to live through the night. Tom held up the Faraday pouch. We'll take this with us, he said. Ava will start asking questions before sunrise. Miles nodded. The tracker, small and ordinary, suddenly felt heavier than K4's entire frame. He boxed the charred components, as if they were relics. He slid the copper hairpin into its own bag with hands steady by choice. Sleep in shifts, Letta advised. You have 1 day to wring out gremlins. We'll be back in the morning with spares. Don't let their timeline turn into your panic. Denise walked them out, thanked them with a sincerity that made all three flinch and smile at once, the way people do when they didn't show up for gratitude, but accepted anyway. Rain misted the porch. The cruiser at the corner rolled away as if it had understood the end of a chapter. Inside, the house was too quiet, and the garage hummed with a living silence. Miles sat on the stool and watched K4 breathe in machine breaths. He thought of Howard's warning, I'll make sure the truth comes out, and of how sometimes truth arrives wearing someone else's name tag. He opened his notebook to a clean page and wrote, in letters that pressed hard enough to dent through 3 sheets, fuse sabotage, lab access, tracker found. Then he added a 4th line he hadn't expected to write at 17. They are watching us move. His phone buzzed on the workbench. A text from Ava. Team found a BLE tracker in the bot. Do not panic. This changes our approach. More soon. He stared at those words. This changes our approach, and felt the floor tilt again. Not down this time, but forward, as if the house itself had decided to volunteer as a runway. He glanced at the garage door, at the dark slice of night beneath it, at the world outside arranging itself around him like a chess problem. He could see the next move as clearly as code. The school would deny. The donor would smile. The cameras would ask sweet, cutting questions. But under K4's visor, 2 LEDs glowed steady, as eyes that had seen the trick and were learning to look past it. The sabotage had been meant to end the story. Instead, it had revealed something else living inside it. Ava's team had revived K4 and pulled a hidden tracker from its chest. Whoever wanted to know where Miles went already did. The tracker didn't come from Chad. It came from a defense tech company. Ava said it without ceremony, like a surgeon reading a chart. She'd called just after sunrise, her voice tight with focus. We traced the Bélier registration, she said. The serial map to a lot purchased by Aegis Systems procurement arm. They're a defense contractor with a civilian robotics lab attached. Like a polite smile. Miles stood in the garage, phone warm against his ear, eyes on K4's visor. The LEDs were dark again. Sleeping child, soldier at ease. What did it matter what metaphor he chose, if the world had already chosen one for him? Aegis Systems, he repeated, slow, as if the syllables were a door code. Boston headquarters, Ava said. Multiple contracts with the DoD. They also sponsor a couple of high school robotics programs, through shell nonprofits, STEM pipeline branding. Their tech scouts show up at state competitions, and mentor kids who look promising. Denise was at the workbench, arms folded, mouth aligned so thin it could cut glass. So the tracker isn't a prank, she said. It's a business model. Ava didn't disagree. Companies sometimes run shadow scouting on young inventors, she said. Especially those without institutional backing. You're less likely to have lawyers. If you're black or brown, they assume even less resistance. She let the sentence break in the middle, leaving silence to say the rest. They watch for novel solutions, then discover the same idea 6 months later with resources you couldn't dream of. If you complain, they waive patents and NDAs you never saw. Miles remembered the copper hairpin masquerading as a fuse. He remembered the cage at school called secure, the way K4 had come home smelling wrong. He felt the shape of the room change, not bigger, not smaller, but suddenly with more entrances. Why me? He asked. It wasn't false modesty. It was hunger for the logic that might let him breathe. I'm a kid in a garage. You solved balance with cheap parts, Priya said from the laptop speaker. Eva had looped her in. Your torque limiting and foot trajectory blend, ugly but elegant, squeezes performance out of commodity actuators. If a giant can replicate your approach at scale, they sell lower-cost bipeds to every warehouse, every police department that thinks the future walks. Your ugly fix is product margin. Denise's eyes flicked to Miles. Translation. His hack could be worth millions, Ava said. And the scary part? It's the kind of solution that looks obvious after someone else shows it to you, which makes stealing it very easy to rationalize. The word millions didn't land as money. It landed as magnitude. Miles looked at K4's ankles, at the little pads he'd cut from rubber matting he'd found in a clearance bin. He thought of the late nights he'd coaxed jittery motors into obedience, the way the control loop had felt like learning a language by ear. No teacher. He felt something like grief, because the idea that a company had already placed a hand on his shoulder and called it encouragement while reaching for his pocket made his triumph taste like ash. How connected is Aegis to Westbrook? Denise asked, eyes already doing the math a parent's gut does at red lights. We know about the donor, Raytech. Eva hesitated a beat. Aegis and Raytech are cousins, she said. Raytech supplies components to Aegis on a couple of contracts, and she exhaled through her nose, irritated at reality. Aegis's community outreach director sits on your district STEM advisory council. The web is small on purpose. A twinge of nausea crept up Miles's spine. Mr. Howard's soft threats, Chad's polished outside help, the school's sudden choice to lock K4 in their cage. It all clustered into a pattern that didn't care whether he called it a conspiracy or simply how things are done. So what do we do? He asked. He hated the desperation in the question, and forgave it because he was 17, and the floor had just shifted. We make a record, Ava said. Every commit, every note, photos of the burned board, the bent copper, the tracker. We timestamp everything, and we publish enough to make theft messy. Then we control the narrative on your stage. My stage, he repeated, tasting those words for the first time. I know Howard threatened you, Ava continued. Let him talk. He's a pawn who thinks the board is his. We play the long game. You present, and we bring witnesses who understand what they're looking at. Denise pinched the bridge of her nose, then dropped her hand and nodded once. Decision made. I'll call my cousin in Boston, she said. He's not a lawyer, but he knows folks who know folks. I want eyes in that room, who know how to make a fuss if the wrong person breathes on my child. Priya chimed back in. Also, we hardened your code, she said. Encrypted the working copy. Put the original on an offline drive. Even if someone tries to image your laptop, they'll find what we want them to find. You're turning me into a heist movie, Miles said, half a laugh. No humor. We're turning you into a witness, Eva said, gentle, to your own work. He wanted to say thank you, and couldn't make the word fit. Instead, he turned to K4 and touched the edge of the visor, like a promise. We're going to New York, he whispered, and it sounded like talking to himself in a mirror before a fight he didn't choose. The doorbell rang. Denise stiffened. In this new world, a chime could be a knife. She peered through the viewer and relaxed a fraction. Amaya stood on the porch in a rain jacket, hood up, eyes bright the way people's eyes are when they've chosen sides. Denise let her in. Your mother know where you are? She thinks I'm at the library, Amaya said, closing the door carefully. Which is not a lie, if the library is knowledge. She looked at Miles. I saw something. He braced. Her I saw had never been gossip. It had always been data. In lab today, she said, voice low. Before you got there, Howard had the cage open. He told Klein he needed to check a serial. Then he took a call. He said a name. Aegis. I thought he meant the Greek shield thing because he loves sounding smart. But he said, I'll send what we can get. He hung up when I came in. I pretended not to hear. Cold slid under Miles's skin like a completed circuit. He said Aegis. Amaya nodded. I didn't understand until now. She spotted K4's open panels, the careful neatness restored. They heard it? We fixed it, he said. Mostly. Amaya's jaw worked. Words trying to find the right shape. They want you to stop walking, she said finally. I don't mean K4. He looked at her, and for a second the room was just two people trying to make each other braver. Eva's voice returned to the speaker, businesslike. We're filing a report with the district, and CCing Aegis is legal, so there's a record that you know. We'll also ping a friendly journalist who doesn't trade integrity for access. Expect noise. Noise is already here, Denise said. Make it music. They got to work. Denise scanned receipts and scribbled dates. Priya packaged code snapshots with dignified paranoia. Letta returned with a new batch of regulators, and a calm that could anchor a storm. Tom sat at the dining table with a laptop and a list of names. He made calls in a voice so soft it made power sound like velvet. When the afternoon tipped into evening, the garage warmed with a second wind. K4 took 5 steps, then 7. The roll pitch coupling smoother than yesterday, because grief sometimes makes your hands precise. Miles tested a squat and rise. The servos hummed gratitude. He set a new lock on the back panel, not because it was unbreakable, but because it made his lungs behave. His phone buzzed again and again. Interview requests. Threats disguised as debates. A teacher from elementary school, who wrote, always knew you had that spark. He wanted to believe her. He also wanted the world to stop acting like spark meant he had to be fireproof. The unexpected twist arrived as a breadcrumb. Tom looked up from his screen. We got a ping, he said. The tracker's activation account used a corporate Wi-Fi registration at Raytech. The room stilled. Chad's dad's company, Amaya said, not asking. Tom nodded. Could be any employee, could be a visitor on guest Wi-Fi. But the request to register the device happened on their network 3 days ago. Denise made no sound, but her hand found the table and set down her mug without spilling. The kind of precise control people mistake for calm. Ava exhaled once. A short thing that contained entire weather systems. We proceed, she said. No accusations without receipts, but the path is clearer. Miles thought of Chad's practiced modesty in front of the camera, the way he said outside help like he was wearing gloves. He also thought of systems, how they protect themselves by laughing, by doubting, by putting trackers in teenagers' work, and calling it mentorship. He looked at K4, at the machine he'd given legs, and realized something that made his chest ache. Every step he took now wasn't just for him, it was for anyone who would walk after. New York, he said again, calmer. We go. Denise nodded. We go. Ava's tone shifted. Operational. We'll meet you at the airport, she said. Different route, separate times, don't post locations. And Miles on stage, you lead with the work, not the wound. They'll try to drag you into explaining your existence. Refuse. Show your mind. That's the whole point. He closed his eyes for a second, and pictured the stage the way he pictured a tricky gate. as a sequence of decisions where balance is the art of refusing to fall. He placed K4 at the center of that picture. He placed Denise at the edge, where she'd always be, cheering without taking the microphone. He placed Ava in the wing. He placed Howard in the audience, pretending not to flinch. Night folded around the house like a careful envelope. They ate standing up, the way people do when the task is bigger than hunger. Amaya texted her mother a photo of a textbook to buy more time. Tom checked the street twice. The corner was empty now, but the emptiness looked like someone had ordered it. At 10:14 p.m., Miles's email chimed. The subject line had no sender name, just an address built of numbers, and a word that wasn't a word. He clicked before anyone could tell him not to. The message contained a single sentence, and a grainy still of K4 in the school cage. Don't go to the expo. New York announced itself like a voltage spike, bright lights, fast talk, the hum of money, and dreamers sharing the same sidewalk. The Javits Center's glass ribs caught morning light and scattered it on the sidewalk like data. Inside, banners hung from the rafters. National Youth Tech Expo. A chorus of fonts promising the future with registered trademarks. 10,000 badges flashed on lanyards, and everything smelled faintly of coffee, carpet, and anticipation. Miles's badge felt heavier than plastic. Miles Carter, presenter. Beneath it, in smaller type, Garage Bipedal Robotics. Ava had smoothed the description to invite curiosity without giving away the secret. The way you frame a painting with light rather than with words. Denise walked on his left, clutching her tote bag like a tether. On his right, Amaya kept pace, eyes everywhere, as if danger could be read like small print. You eat? Denise asked without looking away from the maze of booths. Half a bagel, he said. Eat the other half in your head, she said. Ava met them at the presenter entrance. Black blazer, sneakers, hair pulled back in a knot that meant business. Her team trailed her like punctuation. Priya with a backpack that contained a second brain. Leda carrying a small case with regulators. And Hope, Tom scanning the edges of the crowd with that soft, unsettling focus that noticed everything. Welcome to the noise, Ava said, opening her arms not for a hug, but as if to encompass the sheer size of the moment. Check-in is this way. Your slot is at 2:40 p.m. Stage B. 10 minutes, 2 for Q&A, if the moderator is kind. Denise leaned close. And if the moderator is not kind, then we use the kind of politeness that cuts, Ava said, smiling without showing teeth. They wheeled K4 in on a low platform draped in a black cloth. The robot belted in like cargo that knew its worth. Despite last night's resurrection, Priya had insisted on conservatism. No showy routines until they'd tested venue power, floor friction, interference. The tracker was gone. The code hardened. The battery freshly balanced. Still, risk ticked like a metronome in the corner of Miles's mind. A stagehand scanned their badges and offered the kind of smile people reserve for talented children in fireworks. Thrilled but wary. We need you to sign the equipment waiver, she said. Insurance requires acknowledgement of potential injury due to malfunction. Miles took the clipboard. The waiver's language treated K4 like a mythological beast that might bite. He signed. Denise read every line and signed as guardian, her pen calm as a pulse. They were ushered into a prep room behind Stage B, industrial carpet, a table with bananas and tiny water bottles, posters pinned to corkboard featuring kids in lab coats with media smiles. A volunteer handed Miles a lavalier microphone and a cue sheet. Your intro slide runs for 30 seconds, she said. Then you start. He nodded, though his throat had dried. He turned to K4, unclipped the belts, and rolled the platform near a marked square taped on the floor. He crouched, palm on the bot's shin, and whispered what had become his ritual. We're okay, he said. Read the room, ignore the noise, trust the map. Amaya squeezed his shoulder. They're going to see you, she said. They're going to see a robot, he answered. They'll see both, she said. That's what scares them. At noon, they tested Stage B's floor. The rubberized surface offered more grip than tile, but less forgiveness than his garage mat. K4 took 3 steps, paused, adjusted, performed a controlled pivot. The AV tech watched with his mouth slightly open, and then recovered his professional voice. We'll need you to keep it within the taped perimeter for safety, he said. We had a drone incident last year. Understood, Miles said. Backstage, presenters rotated in, like planets. A girl who'd built a low-cost ECG monitor for rural clinics. A boy with an app for disaster relief logistics. a team demonstrating a tactile reading glove for blind readers. Miles listened from the wings and felt the air thinning and gaining density at the same time. He could do this. He had to do this. He also wanted to ride a subway to the last stop and keep going until there were no more eyes. At 1:30, a volunteer tapped a headset and frowned at an iPad. "Heads up," she said to no one in particular. "We received a safety alert about a non-compliant device scheduled at Stage B at 2:40. Flag from building security." She looked at Miles's platform and then at his face. Her smile tried to recover. "It's probably nothing. They just like to pretend the word security makes them taller." Tom stepped closer, low-voiced. "If anyone asks for custody of the robot, they don't get it," he said. "If anyone claims jurisdiction, we smile and ask for their supervisor's supervisor." Eva's phone buzzed. She skimmed a message and went very still. "Aegis has a booth," she said. "They're demoing a quadruped." And she held up the phone. The image a snapshot of two men in suits and a third wearing a school logo tie. "They've got company." Mr. Howard stood in the photo, mid-handshake, an expression on his face that looked like righteousness rehearsing for applause. Unexpected twist. Not unexpected at all. Howard had come to New York, not as a supporter, as a witness for the prosecution that would happen in the court of public opinion. "Let him watch," Denise said, voice so quiet it made the room hold breath. "Let him watch my son walk." At 2:20 the MC introduced the presenter, before Miles, a boy from Palo Alto with a lineage in his last name, and a robot dog that bounded like money. The applause was loud, familiar. The boy's father waved from the front row, a gesture that read as generational equity. The moderator asked 3 questions about scaling that had nothing to do with the craft and everything to do with valuation. Then, up next, a homegrown innovation story, from a garage to a gate. Eva touched Miles's elbow. "Lead with the build. Then the step. No commentary on Sabotage, unless asked. We save our powder for Q&A if they behave badly." He nodded and stepped into the light. Stage B's house was packed. Students, engineers, cameras on poles like periscopes, seats spooled back into darkness, where investors sat calculating futures. The first row glowed with press badges. A few kids stood along the side, necks craned, and there, 6 rows back beneath a banner for an AI ethics panel. Mr. Howard watched with the polite expression of a person listening to weather. The screen behind Miles filled with his first slide, a photo of his garage, not the staged kind, the real garage, door on sawhorses, thrift store motors, Denise's laundry basket in the corner. He didn't explain the basket. He just let it be there, honest and ordinary as someone else's lab coat. "My name is Miles Carter," he said, microphone making his voice bigger than he felt. "This is K4. I built it in my garage with parts I could afford. I learned from forums and open papers and mistakes. The first time it took a step, it felt like watching a problem become a person." Laughter rippled. Kind, not mocking. "Good." He kept going. "The challenge wasn't just walking," he said. "It was walking with margin on cheap actuators. I wrote a control loop that caps torque without losing swing speed. I used piecewise Bezier curves for foot trajectories, adjusted to floor noise, and yes, some of it is ugly. But ugly can be elegant when it keeps you from falling." He saw a couple of heads in the front row lift, like they'd heard a rare chord. He saw a reporter stop composing a narrative and start taking notes. "Let me show you," he said. He stepped to the taped square. K4 ready. He flipped the switch. LEDs breathed awake. The servo array sang. The room tightened in the way rooms do, when they expect either a miracle or a pratfall. He nodded, double-tapped the dead man's switch, felt the warmth of plastic under his thumb like a familiar hand. K4 took a step. The ankle nipped a micro-correction. Smooth. Another step. The little murmur that follows wonder swelled. Relief crept into Denise's shoulders, and exhaled. Amaya's fingers pressed together like prayer without a steeple. Ava's expression didn't change, but her eyes usins, just an increment. "Obstacle," Miles said, voice steady. He placed a phone block in the path. K4 saw it, hesitated exactly as programmed, sidestepped with that precise 2-beat move that had made a classroom gasp, and cleared it neatly. Applause finally forgot its restraint. From the 6th row, Howard's jaw shifted. In the Aegis booth at the far left, a man in a branded polo stopped mid-spiel to watch. Lips pressed thin. Gesture, Miles said. K4 lifted a hand and waved. It bowed. A kid in the aisle shouted, "Let's go," before remembering where he was. He glanced at the clock downstage. 4 minutes left. He'd front-loaded the technical honesty. Now came the sentence that would stitch it to the rest of his life. "People have asked me where it came from," he said, clearing his throat. "It came from a little black notebook." A slide appeared, covered margins and midnight, and a garage, and a mother who clapped first. "It came from knowing a door would not be opened for me, and deciding to build a hinge." The room held still. For a second he could feel, not just imagine, 1,000 people recalibrating. He could see kids who had been told to be realistic, leaning forward as if the future had ears. And then static licked the speakers. The LEDs in K4's visor pulsed. 1, 2, then dimmed. A hiccup skittered through the servo bus like a rumor. The robot stopped mid-shift, hips angled, torso forward as if listening. Miles felt his blood go cold. Priya was already moving in the wings. Hands a rapid semaphore. "Power sag," she mouthed. Tom glanced toward the stage manager, who was frowning at a tablet, as if it had betrayed him. "Easy," Miles whispered to K4, thumb hovering over the kill. He toggled the low-power recovery sequence he'd rehearsed for exactly this scenario. Nothing changed. The LED blinked again, slow, then went black. A hush swallowed the room. The sound had weight. It pressed down hard. Miles bent slightly, conscious of optics, of how quickly failure becomes identity when it happens to someone like him. He kept his voice calm for the mic, and for the machine. "We'll reset," he said. "Sometimes old venues don't love new loads." A chuckle fluttered from the seats. Not cruel yet. He flicked the manual override. No response. He reached for the battery connector, not to panic, to reseat. The casing felt warmer than it should. Ava stepped to the edge of the wing. "Do not rush," she said, barely a breath, voice threading the distance. "Take your time and narrate the fix." He straightened and faced the crowd. "You're watching the thing nobody shows on YouTube," he said, letting a smile touch his mouth. "Failure in real time. It's how you learn where the truth lives." A few appreciative laughs. He crouched again. And then he saw it. The tiny LED on the regulator board, not dead but throbbing an odd rhythm, not brownout. A command he hadn't sent. "RF interference," Priya whispered, eyes narrowing. She held up a handheld scanner. The meter jumped jittering hard around a channel used by cheap BLE devices. Howard shifted in his chair. The Aegis guy turned away from his booth monitor as if suddenly interested in the ceiling. "Miles," Ava said. "Lower now. Urgent." Announce a 2-second pause. "We need to—" He didn't get to finish hearing her. The house lights dimmed a degree. Nobody else would notice, but he did, the way you notice knee angle differences of 2 degrees. If you've watched a robot learn to walk for a summer. He reached for the connector, ready to yank and reseat, to force a hard reset. K4's visor flickered once. A weak blink. Then mid-presentation, with every camera in the room finding the exact same frame, K4 froze and powered down. For half a heartbeat, the room held its breath with him. K4 stood inert, hips pitched, LEDs dark, the hush thick enough to lean on. Miles felt the script other people had written for him, rushing in, the wonderkind revealed, as an exaggeration, the garage myth shutting off under real light. He didn't let it close. "Okay," he said into the mic, voice steady, because he willed it so. "We're going manual." He knelt and popped the back panel with his thumbnail. The click echoed like a decision. Inside, the hardware looked like a city lit at dusk. Ribbons, headers, the neat stubbornness of zip ties. He slid 2 fingers behind the power bus and found the hard bypass he'd soldered at 3 in the morning. Last week, because paranoia is another word for preparation. A jumper that routed control away from Billy E. Triggers to a shielded UR tether. Ugly, elegant, his signature. He held up the little coiled cable to the crowd. "Wireless is convenient," he said, "and today it is not our friend." A ripple of relieved laughter. He clicked the tether into the auxiliary port on the control board and fed the other end into the pocket serial adapter. Priya had slipped him in the wings, just in case. He didn't say they tried to turn me off. He didn't have to. From the wing, Priya flashed a quick hand sign. "You've got this." Tom made a subtle cut across the throat gesture toward the stage manager, who scurried to mute the venue's roaming bile beacons. The house Wi-Fi hiccuped, then steadied. Ava stood still as a horizon, eyes locked on him like a lifeline. Miles exhaled, resetting in safe mode, he narrated, for the audience and for himself. When a system fails in the wild, step 1 is to make the problem smaller. He thumbed the battery connector out, and in. Cleanly. No drama. A practiced surgeon. The regulator, a lead winked awake. The visor stayed dark for 2 seconds, that stretched like wire, and then bloomed to a steady blue. Hello again, he said. So soft only the front row could hear. He pressed the dead man switch once, twice. The servos murmured. K4 unlocked its knees with a polite sigh. He didn't make it walk yet. He stood with the mic in one hand, the tether in the other, and looked out at the sea of faces, young, old, skeptical, hungry. He saw the kids on the aisle craning. He saw the journalist with the smirk that translated to make me care. He saw Howard, chin lifted, polite patience curdling into hope for failure. He saw Denise in the wing, both hands clasped in front of her chest, like a person trying to hold back a wave. When I was 11, he began, I took apart a toaster. Not because I was hungry, because it made heat, and I wanted to know how. A smile rolled through the room, small, human. By 13 I was fixing neighbors' laptops for $5, and leftover cake. By 15 I had a notebook full of drawings that looked more like monsters than machines. Last summer, I built this. He gestured to K4, in a garage that shares space with detergent, a laundry basket, and a fan that likes to complain. He let the picture sit on their tongues. Here's the part you don't see on the glossy posters, he continued. Some people love you for your idea until they realize where it came from. They love innovation until it shows up in a hoodie from the wrong zip code. They call your progress a prank, your persistence an attitude, your excellence an exception. The crowd had shifted. He could feel it in the way silence thickens when people listen with their whole faces. I'm not an exception, he said. I'm a rule you haven't been taught to expect. A small burst of applause, not yet thunder, but clean. He looked straight into a camera lens and didn't blink. Representation in STEM isn't charity, and it isn't optics. It's accuracy. We have always built things. We were just told not to bring them inside. He lifted the tether a fraction. When the wireless fails you, he said, when the system around you decides you're too loud, too new, too black, hard wire your way back in. Refuse to disconnect. He crouched again. Now back to the machine, he said, and a laugh rippled. Relief and respect, braided. He toggled the safe mode flag, typed 3 commands on the tiny adapter's membrane keys, with his thumb. K4's LEDs brightened. The hips sent. He watched the numbers in his head. Roll error, pitch, yaw, torque caps. It looked right. It felt right. Walk sequence, he said, not for show but to anchor his hands. He double-tapped the switch. K4 took a step. Clean. Another. The ankle whispered adjustments. The torso counter-rotated like a dancer balancing 2 glasses of water. The crowd's hum grew to a sound that had edges. Applause while the miracle was still happening. Obstacle, he said, picking up the phone block again. Let's go gentle. The robot halted. Saw it. Slid left a shoe's width. Passed. Slid back. Cheers leapt up. In the 6th row, Howard's mouth made a shape he could no longer arrange into a smirk. Miles glanced at the clock. 2 minutes. Enough. He wanted one more move. Not showy but human. Gesture, he said. K4 lifted its hand and waved slow, deliberate. Then it bowed, the hinge at its waist moving like the simplest truth. He straightened, heartbeat steady, and looked for Denise. She was crying with her mouth open, an expression he'd only seen once before, when he'd taken his first real solo on a bike, and not fallen. He swallowed and pressed on. Here's what matters most, he said. I didn't build this to prove I belong. I built it because I do. So do the kids in the back who think engineering looks like a club they weren't invited to. You don't need permission to build a hinge. You just need to keep your hands on the work when other people try to write your name off of it. He didn't say sabotage. He didn't say tracker. He didn't have to. People had been in this world long enough to read a sentence when it's written between lines. He closed the loop. I'm Miles, he said. This is K4. We came from a garage. We're heading toward a lab that looks like everyone. Applause broke open like a dam. It filled the rafters and the banners and the cracks and people that cynicism leaves. The MC stepped forward, eyes bright with the kind of enthusiasm that can't be faked under lights. Incredible, she said into her mic. Question? A hand shot up in the 2nd row. An older woman in a blazer with an engineer's posture. How did you maintain stability with consumer-grade IMUs? She asked. Respect baked into the question. He answered cleanly. Technical. Generous. Low pass filter on the IMU. Dual gyro redundancy. Derivative cap to avoid chasing noise. And a bias estimator that resets on stance. Most important, accept that your hardware is honest about its limits. Work with what you've got, not what the brochure promised. Another hand kid. 12 maybe. Eyes wide like possibility. Does it get scared? Laughter, warm. Miles grinned. Only when I do, he said. And then we both breathe. One more front row press badge, careful hair. Some say you had assistance. The pause around assistance was not accidental. What would you say to skeptics? He didn't look toward Howard. He didn't need to. And say come to the garage, he replied. Bring a soldering iron. Ugly code allowed. We'll learn something together. Applause again, bigger this time, because defiance in a soft voice travels farther. The MC raised a hand, timing the close like a conductor. Last demo move, she offered, giving him the kind of alley-oop only generosity makes. He nodded. One last thing. He walked to a small object on the edge of the stage, something he'd tucked there in the first minute like a secret. A hinge. A simple hardware store hinge he'd screwed to a scrap of wood, and painted the same matte black as. This, he said, holding it up, is how doors change. He knelt and set the hinge on the floor, open, and had K4 place its foot across the joint, one side before, one side after. We build the piece that lets something swing that used to be stuck. He tapped the switch. His force shifted weight across the hinge and back. A small choreography of balance and belief. On the big screen, the motion looked like a metaphor learning to walk. The room stood first a row, then a section, and then the whole of stage B. Standing ovation. Not required, not politeness, but relief and recognition turned into noise. Behind the applause, a flicker of motion moved like a shadow found legs. Two men in dark suits broke from the aisle and advanced toward the side stairs, with the unhurried purpose of people who rely on credentials more than consent. As the sound rolled like weather, they flashed badges at the stagehand, silver shields paired with corporate laminate. The laminate read, Aegis Systems, compliant. Ava's smile didn't falter, but the temperature of it dropped a degree. Tom saw them at the same time, and angled toward the stairs. Denise's hands unclasped. She stepped out from the wing a half-inch before she remembered her own promise to herself about not rushing towards storms. KT4 stood center stage, LEDs calm, like it had not just resurrected under pressure, and made 10,000 strangers reconsider the shape of merit. Miles bowed, quick, honest, then straightened, and caught the glint of the badges. Moments later, the MC began cheerfully into her mic, pivoting toward the next presenter. The men reached the stairs and nodded at security like friends. One lifted his voice just enough to carry across the hush that follows thunder. Mr. Carter, he called, courteous as an invoice. We'll need to speak with you immediately about proprietary technology. The applause was still breaking like waves when the two men in suits reached the stage stairs. The taller one stepped forward, flashing a silver badge and a corporate laminate so close to Miles's face that the reflection of K4's visor glinted off it. Mr. Carter, he said with a voice made of smooth stone. We have reason to believe your device incorporates proprietary military technology developed by Aegis Systems. Under our intellectual property protocols, we're obligated to take immediate custody for evaluation. The words hung there, louder than the crowd. They weren't a request, they were a verdict dressed as procedure. Ava moved before anyone else could blink. She was on stage in 3 long strides, heels silent on the rubber mat. No, you don't, she said. It was not loud, but it was the kind of tone that makes people realize they've just stepped into a room with an attorney who keeps her teeth sharp. Mr. Carter's work is fully documented, from first sketch to final solder joint. You have no warrant, you have no legal claim, and you have no right to harass a minor in the middle of a public educational event. The shorter man, stockier, with a clipped military haircut, shifted his weight. Our technology monitoring systems detected nothing you can prove in court, Ava cut in, her voice slicing cleaner than steel. Your so-called detection is a fishing expedition. Here's what you're going to do instead. You're going to step back, watch your tone, and if you have an actual legal complaint, you can file it through the channels we will be more than happy to bury you in. From the wing, Priya was already moving. Laptop open, fingers flying. Within 30 seconds, she had pulled up the full chain of commit logs, CAD file timestamps, Git history, and video proof of the build process. Denise stepped forward and planted herself between the men and her son. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The stance was enough to make the taller man take a half step back. "You think this is intimidation?" Eva said, turning her body so her profile was to the crowd and the cameras. "But what you've just done is create a record, in front of witnesses, media, and a live stream, that your corporation is attempting to seize the intellectual property of a 17-year-old black student, without cause. That's called theft with extra steps." The man's jaw twitched. "Our counsel will be in touch. Make sure they're well rested," Eva replied, already signaling to Tom to escort them off stage. It took less than an hour for the footage to go viral. The clip Aegis men confronting Miles, Eva's calm dismantling of their authority, Denise's immovable stance looped endlessly on Twitter, TikTok, and the evening news. By the 6 o'clock broadcast, the lower third on CNN read, "Black teen fights tech giant over robotic invention." Miles sat in the green room with K4 beside him, watching the coverage as if it were about someone else. "They're going to keep coming, aren't they?" he asked quietly. "Yes," Ava said. "No sugar. But so are we." By the next morning, the narrative had shifted from skepticism to outrage. Newspapers ran headlines about systemic barriers in STEM. Opinion pieces framed Miles's story as a parable of corporate predation. Local leaders back in Westbrook posted congratulations, some sincere, some opportunistic, and still the hate mail came. Emails laced with threats, anonymous DMs warning him to drop it before you get hurt. Denise read them first, deleting the worst before he could see them. She'd lived long enough to know the difference between anger that dies in the throat and anger that buys a plane ticket. Meanwhile, Eva's legal team went on offense. They filed a preemptive copyright registration on every piece of K4's design, from the CAD geometry to the control algorithm. They uploaded the build log to a public blockchain timestamping service. They sent Aegis a cease and desist, so aggressive it read like poetry. Then came the twist. A tech journalist, digging through corporate filings, connected an unexpected dot. The STEM Advisory Council member, who liaised between Westbrook High and its donors, was also a paid consultant for Aegis Systems. His name, Daniel Howard. Miles read the headline 3 times. "That, Mr. Howard," Amaya finished for him. Her voice was flat, like a knife lying on a table. The article laid it out. Howard had been paid a strategic consulting fee for talent identification and acquisition in emerging robotics programs. The timing aligned almost perfectly with the start of the semester, his sudden interest in verifying Miles's work, and the mysterious tracker found in Kate. It wasn't proof in the legal sense, but in the court of public opinion, it was gasoline on a fire. Within hours, parents at Westbrook were calling for his resignation. Students posted videos recounting subtle discouragement, favoritism toward wealthy white club members, and how Howard had dismissed projects from black students as ambitious but unrealistic. Aegis issued a statement calling the connection coincidental and denying any wrongdoing. Howard emailed the school community insisting his role with Aegis was advisory and unrelated to school affairs. The wording read like it had been vetted by 3 lawyers and 0 friends. Miles stared at the screen, a swirl of anger and something colder. This wasn't just about a robot anymore. It never had been. It was about the way the system had been engineered to work exactly as it had. To doubt, to delay, to He looked at Denise. "They were never laughing at the robot," he said. "No," she replied. "They were laughing at the idea that you could build something they couldn't control." The phone rang again, this time not a threat or an interview request. A producer from a national morning show wanted to fly Miles and K4 out for a live segment. Ava waited instantly. "We take it," she said. "The more eyes, the less shadow they can work in." Priya was already thinking ahead. "We'll prep a public demo that Aegis can't spin," she said. "One that leaves no doubt about originality." Denise squeezed her son's shoulder. "And we make sure everyone knows exactly who tried to stop you." Miles nodded. The weight in his chest hadn't lifted, but it had changed shape. It was no longer the pressure of doubt. It was the gravity of purpose. That night, as he shut down the garage for the evening, his phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. No threats this time. Just a link to a file. He hesitated, then opened it. Inside was a single video clip. Grainy, security camera footage from the school robotics lab. It showed Mr. Howard alone, leaning over K4's open back panel. He slipped something inside, closed it, and walked out without looking back. The clip ended with a timestamp from 2 days before the sabotage. The grainy clip played 3 times in Ava's office, each pass slower than the last. No one spoke during the first loop. By the second, Denise's hands had curled into fists so tight her nails left half-moon marks in her palms. On the third, Miles looked away, not because he couldn't watch, but because watching too long made it feel like Howard was standing in the room, smug and untouchable. "That," Ava said, tapping the screen, "isn't just tampering. That's corporate interference in an educational environment. Caught on record. And it's the nail in his professional coffin." By the end of the week, the video was everywhere. News sites, Twitter threads, student group chats. The district released a 2-sentence statement. Mr. Daniel Howard has resigned his position effective immediately. The district is committed to fostering a fair and supportive learning environment for all students. It was the kind of language meant to close a door without admitting what was on the other side. But the public had already decided the verdict. Howard's resignation didn't stop the fallout. It accelerated it. Alumni came forward with their own stories. Grant applications quietly misplaced. STEM competition slots reassigned to other students. Suspicious equipment failures before major showcases. The image of him shaking hands at the Aegis booth now read like a confession. 2 weeks later, Ava's legal team called Miles and Denise into a conference room that smelled faintly of victory and strong coffee. Priya spread the paperwork across the table like a dealer laying out a winning hand. "Aegis has agreed to settle," she said. Miles blinked. "Settle like money." "Money," Ava confirmed. "But more importantly, full acknowledgement that K4 is entirely your intellectual property. They drop any and all claims and you retain all rights, present and future. Plus they pay damages for interference and reputational harm." Denise exhaled like she'd been holding that breath since September. "How much?" Ava's smile was small but sharp. "Enough to fund your next 4 years without touching a loan, and enough for them to think twice before targeting another kid like you." The settlement terms were confidential, but the headlines weren't. "Black teen inventor wins against tech giant" blared across business sections. Commentators debated whether this was the beginning of a larger reckoning for corporate talent acquisition practices. For Miles, it was simpler. The work was his again, entirely, indisputably his. One evening, Ava invited him and Denise to dinner at a quiet restaurant tucked between glass office towers. After the appetizers, she slid an envelope across the table. "This isn't from the settlement," she said. "This is from me." Inside was a single sheet of heavy cream paper. The MIT logo gleamed in the corner, embossed in deep red. Below it, an offer letter. Full scholarship. 4 years. School of Engineering. Miles stared at it, his brain momentarily empty of words. "I didn't even apply yet." "You didn't have to," Ava said. "I called in a favor. They've seen the video. They've read your documentation. And they're not about to let someone else get to you first." Denise reached across the table, touching the edge of the paper like it might vanish if she gripped it too hard. "My baby's going to MIT," she whispered, half to herself. The days that followed were a mix of relief and disorientation. Without the constant background noise of suspicion and defense, Miles found himself returning to the garage just to hear the quiet hum of tools. He and K4 began experimenting with more advanced gate algorithms, teaching it to navigate uneven terrain. Sometimes, late at night, he'd catch himself smiling at the thought of showing up to his first MIT lecture with a robot that had already beaten a Fortune 500. But Westbrook still loomed in his daily life. Graduation was coming, and with it the odd bittersweetness of leaving a place that had been both cage and launchpad. Friends congratulated him in hallways. Some teachers who had once ignored him now shook his hand like they'd always believed in him. He learned to nod politely, without pretending it was true. The day of graduation arrived warm and bright. The kind of June morning that smelled faintly of cut grass and sunscreen. Denise pinned his cap just so, straightened the collar of his gown, and took more photos than memory cards were built for. The ceremony was a blur, names read, caps lifted, polite applause for each. When it was his turn to cross the stage, there was a murmur in the crowd, then a cheer that swelled louder than he expected. He shook the principal's hand, still the same man who had once verified his work with doubt in his eyes, and took his diploma with a steady grip. Afterward, he wandered to the side lawn where students milled in clusters, tossing caps in lazy arcs. Denise hugged him tight enough to anchor him in the moment. Ava appeared briefly, offering a crisp handshake and a quiet, "See you in Cambridge." That's when he noticed the envelope. It was small, plain white, tucked under the corner of his diploma folder. His name was written in a slanted, deliberate hand he recognized immediately. Chad Whitmore. The same Chad who had laughed the loudest in Mr. Howard's class, who had spread whispers about outside help, who had smirked when the principal suspended him from the robotics club. The flap wasn't sealed. Inside was a single sheet of notebook paper, folded twice. He hesitated, glancing around as if Chad might materialize nearby, ready to mock the act of reading it. But Chad was nowhere in sight. Miles unfolded the paper. The first line stopped him cold. "I think I owe you the truth." The paper trembled in his hands, not from wind, but from the way truth makes muscles forget their jobs. Around him, caps skittered across the lawn, parents called names, and speakers thudded against a playlist that tried too hard to be summer. Miles found a sliver of shade beside the bleachers, and read, "I think I owe you the truth. You were better than me." That's the part I never said out loud. Because my whole life has been built on people saying it about me. When you made K4 walk, I felt something ugly I didn't want to name. Then Mr. Howard pulled me into the lab and told me good programs need structure. He said some kids need reality checks, or they'll get hurt. He asked me to help verify you. I said what he wanted on camera. He asked me to make sure you brought the robot in. He said we'll handle the rest. I didn't know what the rest was until I did. I didn't put the tracker in. I didn't touch your robot. But I knew someone would. I knew because my dad had meetings at Raytech, where Aegis people came in through a back door. They used words like pipeline, and early identification, and ownership. Howard was at one of those meetings. I heard him say your name like it was a problem to be solved. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm not sure I would. I just want you to know that the video of Howard in the lab, that came from me. I pulled it from the school server. I guess I wanted to do one thing that didn't break me when I looked in the mirror. I'm leaving for Stanford next week, and I don't want to build again like this. If you ever decide to hate me, make sure it's for the right reasons." Ja. Miles read it twice more because clarity sometimes hides in repetition. The grass pressed a pattern into the thin soles of his dress shoes. He looked up to find Amaya, a few steps away, reading him the way she always did, careful, curious, without presumption. He held out the paper. She read silently, eyes moving left to right like a steady metronome. When she finished, she folded the letter along the crease it had already learned. "He admitted it," she said. "Not everything we needed, but enough to feel the outline." "He sent the video," Miles said, and the sentence tasted strange, a rescue braided with betrayal. "People are not one thing," Amaya murmured. "He was what the system asked him to be, until he decided not to be for a second. I don't know if that makes him brave or late." Miles thought of Howard's hand entering K4's back panel, with casual certainty, the tracker's lazy blink. He thought of Chad's smirk in those first days, and the private crumple in his eyes, when the room laughed a little too quickly. "Maybe both," he said. Denise appeared, diploma under her arm, cheeks damp and refusing to apologize for it. "You ready to leave, graduate?" she asked, the word with a capital letter and a dozen meanings. "In a minute," he said. He folded Chad's letter and slid it into his diploma folder, not to honor it but to keep it from being lost to wind. He looked back at the stage, the podium pretending to have mattered, and felt a strange looseness in his chest, like a knot slip-knotting itself open. The robot had taught him that balance isn't stillness, it's motion organized. He had been moving through rooms arranged to make him doubt the way gravity applied to him. He had learned to carry his own floor. On the drive home, Westbrook rolled past the windows, with the indifference of places that think they will go on unchanged. The corner store with the hand-lettered sign for fresh peaches. The barber who always shouted "Scholar" when he walked by, even before there was a reason. The school, square and stubborn, where the board with empty hooks once told the truth louder than any brochure. The garage felt softer when they opened it, as if it had been waiting to hear how the story turned out. K4 stood in the corner, powered down, still wearing the scratches of battles fought without fists. Miles touched the visor with his middle knuckle, a habit that had become more than superstition. "We did it," he said, and then corrected himself. "We are doing it." Denise leaned her head against the doorframe. "You don't have to be gracious if you don't want to," she said. "We can dance and we can rage. Both fit." He considered that, then thought of something that felt heavier than either. "I want to build," he said simply. "And you will," she replied. with people who clap for the right things. The next weeks were an odd blend of endings and beginnings. He wrote thank you emails to the teachers who had done more than formulas. They had held space. He mailed a copy of the settlement letter to the thrift store manager, who had quietly set aside decent motors behind the counter for the kid with the skinny elbows. He cleaned the garage in a way he never had, labeling bins like a person who believes the future will need to find things. On a humid afternoon dense with gnats and ripe fruit smells, Ava stopped by with a slim, heavy box. Inside was a first-generation prosthetic hand from her company's earliest line, engraved on the wrist with a single word, begin. Every lab keeps a relic, she said. Yours should too. He set it on the shelf above K4's charging dock. A quiet witness to the way machines and people teach each other persistence. The unexpected twist arrived by mail again. Smaller, rougher, made of a postcard with a smudged skyline. The postmark said Palo Alto. The handwriting said careful. He didn't need to turn it over to know. When he did, the back held one sentence. I told Stanford what I did. They put me on probation and pulled my funding. I'm working at a cafe and reapplying next year. If I'd told the truth earlier, I might be in class right now. I deserved this, and somehow I'm still shocked. I hope you build the hinge you talked about. No signature. It didn't need one. He stared at it for a long time, not sure what he felt. Satisfaction, sadness, a thin thread of pity he didn't entirely trust. People are not one thing. Consequences are not either. He packed slowly for Boston. Not much hoodies, notebooks, a cheap pot, a better soldering iron. Denise folded shirts into tidy rectangles, like a person arranging votes. When she found his first Lego motor in the back of a drawer, she held it up between two fingers, with a look that said both look how far and look how you were already here. They argued about whether K4 should ride in the cargo hold or come as oversized carry-on. If some baggage handler drops my grand robot, they won't, ma. They will because they can. I'll fix whatever breaks. I'd rather not find out. In the end, Ava's foundation arranged a specialized crate and a note printed in a font that made compliance seem like patriotism. On the last night, the garage became a chapel. Miles ran one last diagnostics pass as crickets stitched the backyard with sound. K4 stepped, pivoted, bowed, then stood still in a posture that read like attention. He placed his palm flat against the torso panel and felt the faint warmth that meant life at rest. See you on the other side of a state line, he said. The future didn't answer, but everything electric in the room nodded. The airport at dawn had the unreal cleanliness of mornings that require choices people can't take back. They wheeled K4 through oversized check-in, while a TSA supervisor phoned a supervisor who phoned a guidebook. Denise kept the paperwork in a folder with tabs and a bright sticky note that read, "Be nice but not too." Security gathered politely, the way people gather when something unfamiliar looks safer than usual, because a boy with a diploma carries it like responsibility. At the gate they sat in the spill of light from a window that made the tarmac look like a video game, with the sound off. Amaya texted photos of a map with pins on Cambridge coffee shops and library nooks. Your future snacking itinerary. Ava sent a last-minute checklist that began with eat and ended with you belong. The flight number blinked from on time to boarding with a tone that sounded like permission. Denise took his face in her hands and turned it toward hers, the way she had when he was 5, and trying to answer a question behind his eyes. You remember 2 things, she said. You don't let anyone rename what you built, and you call me even when you don't need anything. I always need something, he said, smiling, with a mouth that kept wanting to be a tremble. I need to hear you say you're proud of me.
They saying it with rent,
she replied, laughing. Then she said it out loud because some sentences should be heard. I am proud of you, Miles Carter. Not because you beat them, because you didn't let them change you while you figured out how to beat the problem. They stood when Group B was called, not because they were Group B but because a gate agent with a kind face waved them forward. Special handling for your friend, she said, nodding at K4. We'll load it last. We'll roll it to the cabin if the flight's light. People nearby snapped photos, asked softly if it was the famous robot from TV. Miles answered in a voice that tried to be a bridge and a boundary at the same time. As they turned toward the jet bridge, a little girl in pink sneakers and a braid that refused symmetry tugged at her father's sleeve. She looked up at K4 and then at Miles with the square honesty of 7. Her voice carried just enough to cut through the airport's mechanical hum. I want to build one too, she said. Miles stopped. He crouched without making it a moment, and made it one anyway. Start with anything, he told her. A toy, a toaster, a hinge. Ask it how it works. Don't wait for someone to tell you you're allowed. Her father mouthed thank you over her head, eyes bright in the way of men who never heard those words young and get to hear them now through their children. The girl nodded with the solemnity of a pact. I'm going to, she said, and it wasn't a vow to him, it was to herself. He stood and looked down the jet bridge, the long hallway to a sky that felt less like escape and more like continuation. Behind him, a town that tried to make him a lesson settled into the ordinary business of pretending it hadn't. Ahead, a city that intended to test him flickered on the far side of cloud. K4's crate clicked as a ground crew member locked the final latch. Denise squeezed his hand once and let go. The letting go loud and quiet both. He stepped forward, boarding pass scanned, past the line where stories become flights. Somewhere in that shift between carpet and metal, he realized the little girl's sentence had landed like a baton. He didn't turn around to see if she was still watching. He didn't have to, because the hinge he'd built had already swung. No one should have to fight this hard. Just to be believed. If you think talent should be judged by skill, not skin, type yes. If you believe in justice,